So good morning, everyone, and welcome to our second day of Shattered Glass workshop. We're going to start this session with Stephen Koob, the Chief Conservator Emeritus from the Corning Museum of Glass. Stephen received an MA in 1975 in Classical Archaeology from Indiana University and the BS in 1980 in Archaeological Conservation and Materials Science from the Institute of Archaeology of London. From 1986 till 1998, he worked as conservator, specializing in ceramics and glass at the Freer Gallery of Art and Arthur McSackler Gallery, Smithsonian Institution, Washington, D.C. In 1998, he came to the Corning Museum of Glass, from where he has recently retired as Chief Conservator Emeritus. He has recently published a book, Conservation and Care of Glass Objects. He is a fellow of IIC International Institute of Conservation and a fellow of AIC American Institute for Conservation. He has received the Caroline Keck Award from AIC in 2014 and honorary membership from AIC 2017. Stephen, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Nadine. Here in Beirut and also wherever you are across the world, I wish we could all be together, but soon, I hope. I'd like to first thank Nadine Panayot and her staff for making me feel so welcome here. Terrific. I've been here almost 2 weeks already. And I'd also like to give a special hello to my good colleagues and friends, Thilo and Marianne and Denise. So I'm going to talk about one of my favorite subjects, Paraloid B-72. Should be familiar to conservators, but maybe not so familiar to archaeologists. So this material was first known as acryloid. It was produced by Roman Haas, a company in the United States, but it spread worldwide, and then named it in Europe Paraloid. In 2007, they dropped the name acryloid entirely. So it's known now only as Paraloid. So I'll just refer to it as B-72 because that's a lot easier. So I'm going to talk about three things. I'm going to talk about its use as a consolidant and as a material that we can use for casting films for loss compensation to fill in gaps or missing areas specifically. So it's used, again, most popularly as both a consolidant and an adhesive. 72. Well, the main reason is its stability. It's the most stable resin in the world. It's been researched extensively. Now, certainly 60 years of tested use, but Robert Feller had just tested it for use in the National Gallery in Washington, D.C. in the early 60s for use as a coating for old masters' paintings. As it turned out, it was an excellent material and wonderfully stable, much more so than the old resin. But it was too new, too clear, too shiny, and abandoned it for its use. However, it is the most soluble resin we know, so it dissolves very easily, and it also can be removed very easily. You can see the rest of the list here: great bond strength, compatibility, safe to use with say solvents, and easy to modify, and also easy to prepare and to apply. And last but not least, certainly dependable. This is Robert Feller, who is a colleague I worked with for many years, and he was going to write a book on Paraloid B-72, but he unfortunately never got around to it. So its use as a consolidant. This actually goes back to probably the 1960s, well over 50 years. It was first used for consolidating fragile or friable, what we call friable or flaking. It penetrates well. It gives very good strength, and in low concentrations, it is not shiny. It's almost invisible. It does darken the surface a little bit, but that's not a problem. It's also has been used more recently on glass, flaking surfaces, and surfaces of weathering that are lifting off the surface. So this is a great material. It's used in moderately low concentrations. So you certainly should avoid high concentrations because it will not penetrate very well at higher concentrations, and it will leave you with a shiny surface. And low concentrations below 3%, I would say, do not impart enough to do any good. Certainly you should avoid low evaporating solvents because they're retained by the resin for very long periods of time. Toluene and xylene can be retained in the film for as long as a month or longer. For very hot climates, you can add a little bit of ethanol. So I say 10% is a good estimate. And you should definitely consider the different ways that you should apply it. I have two examples here. Thanks to Claire Cuyaubère, who for the last 10 days, these are some images that she had taken of working on the glass here of introducing this consolidant with a syringe on the left and consolidating with a brush on the right. The consolidant is applied just to the edges of the weathering, and it is drawn in literally by a cap. So you don't really want to coat the entire glass. This is in the long term not good for the glass, but it's amazing that like a 5 or 10% solution will be drawn in immediately and actually bring the surface back down. We don't like to remove the weathering. Weathering is part of the original surface of the glass, and glass weathers from the outside in, so you're really removing some of the original surface. So we want to consolidate or to strengthen it so that it can be handled. Its use as an adhesive is more recent. I first published this in 1986 in an article in Studies in Conservation, and I have a lot of good reasons for this. Its preparation recipe is fairly simple. It's almost about a 50% solution weight to volume in acetone. Basically working with 50 grams in 105 milliliters, so it's almost exactly 50%. It's best prepared if you suspend the resin above the acetone, just touching the acetone, as you can see with this bag and jar here. And although it's tempting to agitate it because you think it's going to dissolve faster, it's actually a mistake. So you should not agitate it. You should just suspend it, touching the acetone. What happens is you have gravity working for you. So gravity makes the resin dissolve into the, I don't know if there's an arrow here. Yeah, so you can see the resin here and just touching the acetone. And what it does is the resin dissolves into the acetone, collecting more towards the bottom, leaving you with clean acetone at the top. So it's a simple physical chemistry of dissolution, and it dissolves very quickly. As I mentioned, with the use as a consolidant, you can also add some ethanol to the adhesive for work in hot climates. It slows down the evaporation rate of the acetone. And I also recommend that you do not use it out of a jar or even out of a syringe. It should be poured into adhesive tubes as they're available commercially. And once you do this, the adhesive will last for years, and you'll be always using a concentration that's exactly the same. So here I am closing the tubes with pliers, and you can store them. They'll keep literally for years. I have just recently bought some new tubes, which you see here with polypropylene plastic tops. Terrific because they're very thin applications, and they're available from Conservation Resources, which has a company both in the United States and in the UK. I've done strength testing, and other museums and researchers have done the same. It's amazingly strong for an acrylic. I also did this was from an old commercial in America, as I glued a hard hat to the ceiling. In the commercial, it's actually using super glue, gluing the hard hat to an I-beam. But I did this, and it's a tricky procedure, but indeed, never underestimate the strength of your adhesive. So it's a tricky problem, but I had to convince some people. There were people who criticized me saying, it's an acrylic, it can't be very strong. It is, it's very strong. There are a variety of application techniques. The most popular is what we call piece-by-piece assembly, or one piece at a time. And you need to lay out the pieces so you know the order of assembly. This is important. And you also need a little bit of acetone and a soft brush at hand. This is for both thinning the adhesive if you need to thin it, or for cleaning. And here's the procedure here. You can see the sequence starting from the upper left, applying the adhesive and then putting the piece on. And once that is set, which can be 5-10 minutes, maybe longer for thick glass, you can start with the next piece, and it's virtually invisible as you complete the object. No further preparation is needed, so you can apply it directly out of the tube to the glass. So you don't need to do any sealing of the glass, because glass is non-porous and non-permeable. You can just directly apply it and join it. Another possibility is to tape the pieces together. This is only good if you have a surface that is strong enough and unweathered to tape the glass. So here's a little Roman jar that was taped together. You do all the taping first, and then you introduce the adhesive. So these are the small bits of tape I used, and you introduce it with a syringe or a paper. And here's the finished product. And then you remove all the tape. Another technique is to do the taping first. This is very popular in Europe, is you tape the pieces together first, and then you replace the tape with what I call these little clamps or bridges. I call them omega clamps because they Greek letter omega. And these are applied, as you can see, across the joins. I don't know if I can show you with an arrow here, but across the joins here. Oh, there's here you can see the clamp going across the join. And once it's applied simply with super glue, which is another acrylic. And so it joins very quickly and solidly. And then you remove the tape. And that makes the application of the adhesive by syringe much more efficient, because you don't have the tape in the way. The tape is actually a problem, because usually when you apply the adhesive, once it touches the tape, it stops. This is typical of capillary action. So injection, or it's another term. Anyway, let's see. Sorry, I don't need that. Okay. So here's a piece in many fragments put together with B-72. Here's another. This piece, of course, could not be taped, as you can see, because it has a lot of surface. And if you taped it, all the weathering would be removed when you remove the tape. Here's the piece after treatment. It was actually a very quick procedure. It only took me 6 hours, but it was over a period of several months, because I only did like 1 or 2 pieces a day. And then, so it took a longer period. And I couldn't have done. So a lot of these really small pieces, you really need a microscope to locate them in the proper position. And there's no reason not to put pieces in. There's always a place, and you'll find it maybe you'll find it. Adjustments can be made using solvent, acetone, with a brush, or using a hairdryer. Paraloid B-72 is thermoplastic. So at a fairly low temperature, 50 degrees centigrade, it's not so low, it will soften, and then the pieces can be adjusted or moved. We use this a lot, especially for archaeological class. And here's just one piece that I did from the collection here, from the damaged case at the museum. It's an Islamic lamp in many fragments. It looks like a serious challenge. It was indeed. But after just one day, I back together. So very, very, very satisfying result. There are limitations. I certainly wouldn't use it outdoors in very high temperatures and over 45 degrees C, because as I just mentioned, a hairdryer will soften it. A hairdryer is about 50 degrees centigrade. So I'm going to be using it outdoors in the sun. And no adhesive works well in high humidity situations, so especially the acrylic. Certainly you need climate control. Loss compensation. Now this is a question of should you or should you not? Loss compensation certainly is something that is done for maybe two reasons. It's done for structural support on a piece that cannot be held together without, or it's done for aesthetic reasons. i.e. you want to put the piece on display in a museum and want it to be more comprehensible to the or publication maybe, but it's certainly not necessary for all pieces. And we have already discussed this with the materials that we're working with here, all the pieces that were damaged in the blast, that we are not going to do any loss compensation unless it's really needed for structural support. So this is something that's even more recent. We started doing this about 15 years ago in our laboratory at Corning, at the Corning Museum of Glass, both with my assistant conservator and with an intern. So we've published 3 papers on this already, and we've discovered that it is possible to cast B-72 as a film. It's difficult because if you try to cast it in the open, you immediately get bubbles because the way acrylics in their drying. So if you pour it out on just a small glass or something, the B-72 forms a film. It immediately forms a film, and then it traps the acetone beneath that film. And then the acetone has to slowly migrate beyond that film, and it leaves air bubbles behind, and many, many air bubbles. So it distorts the film and it's not clear. So we discovered that adding 20 of ethanol, or approximately 20% ethanol, so 20 in 100 milliliters is 20%. We modify the evaporation rate of the acetone, slows it down. And then you also need to put it in a restricted solvent environment, which is really quite simple, a plastic bag. Polyethylene, which if you all, they're used for food, for storing your leftover sandwich or anything in the refrigerator, is permeable to both water vapor and to solvents. So the solvent will evaporate through the plastic if you put the B-72 in a restricted environment like this. So we use silicone rubber molds, and you pour the B-72 in there, and so we've got a variety of these here. This is what it looks like after just 2 or 3 days. The resin is clear. It's started to dry because the solvent has evaporated, but it's still flexible. So you can actually remove it out of the mold, and you can shape it to different shapes or cut it. And these are some tips I recommend for this. Use thin limit the amount of air in the bags. And remember, you're going to get quite a lot of shrinkage because we started with 30% B-72, and we've even diluted it, so it's more than 70%. But the shrinkage is what we call lateral. It's across the surface and not from the sides. So you don't get any dimensional change from the sides, which is really important for using as a film material. And you can make all kinds of colors, textures, shapes. We've been having a lot of fun doing this. So I just have one case study, and that's a piece actually very similar to what we've been working on here. It's probably a 3rd, 4th century AD piece, probably Roman, Mediterranean certainly, heavily weathered, so difficult to handle. But here it is laid out. See a lot of weathering, so shaping is going to be possible for this piece. And as I usually recommend to my students or trainees, you either start with the largest piece or start with the top or the bottom. I don't know what that's about. Okay, so here's some of the fragments, extremely thin, which is what Claire and I have been working with, or moderately thin. It's still pretty thin. And start from the bottom. The pieces are laid out in the order of assembly. And here's assembling the pieces and then using a soft brush with some acetone to clean up the excess adhesive. It's very easy to remove the excess adhesive. So here's the almost completed assembly. And here it is completed, but with some areas that are missing. So there's areas here that are missing and on the shoulder and in the central body. So these were replaced with cast B-72, as I've just been talking about. It was tinted and given a little bit of color with some dry pigments just to match the glass. And you can see here it's coming out of the mold, and it's still flexible enough that it can be shaped even with your finger. And here it is matching to the object. You can see the loss area on the object. Here's a smaller area that was matched. You can just use the simple and cut the piece to the exact shape of the loss area. And here it is inserted. And so you can insert this simply by using a tiny bit of acetone on a very small brush, just wetting the edges of it, because B-72 is so soluble, it'll immediately stick to the glass. You don't want to use a lot because it'll dissolve. And so here's testing another piece and attaching it. And here's some loss areas that you can see, one here, and then a smaller loss area here where the arrow is. And so here's after the fills have been done. And you can go one step. You could touch it up to look almost invisible, but that's, again, an aesthetic question that you have to balance with ethics. You know, do you want it to be visible? It's something that over time has changed dramatically, depending on whether you're of the museum. And I always defer to them. And our current curator at the Corning Museum of Glass prefers the fills to be visible. But you could go with something like just simply watercolors. And with watercolors, you can make it completely invisible. So one material. Just one material. This is a good conservation principle. We should not be using many materials on the same object, what their interaction might be in 10 years, 100 years. But we do know the stability of B-72 is at least 100 years, maybe 300, maybe 500. I don't know. I've really never had a piece fall apart. So it's a long time. And this with Robert Feller over the years, he said, what better test than to test of time? So I'm really happy that this is a conservation community, and I hope it continues to be used throughout the world. Thank you.
Hello, good morning, Nadine. Can I ask a question, please?
Yes, please, go ahead.
It's Randa Smadi. I got some Chinese, old Chinese cups from Beirut to London. Some of them were chipped, others were broken. I sent them to be repaired and I paid lots of money for them. I was asked not to put any hot water in them. Are all repaired glasses, I mean, you should never use them again or put them under hot water?
It's a good question. I probably would not use use hot water on something repaired with B-72, but there are some hold up to hot water. It depends what was used. One of my general rules is never, ever put in a dishwasher. Dishwashers are evil. They're the worst thing you can do to a glass. It actually deteriorates an archaeological burial. So no dishwasher, but yes, you can use them if they were repaired with an adhesive like epoxy. Epoxy is a very, very strong plastic. And I've actually used those. My favorite coffee mug, the handle broke off. So I glued it back together with use it 10 years later. So there's some that you can use, yes. If you have chips or missing areas of the rim, I can guarantee you they will discolor if you use them with coffee or tea, but they will still hold up. So yeah, there are certainly uses that you can do, but wash them very carefully so that you're not, putting a lot of strain or the ceramic. So yeah, one of the things that we try to avoid in cleaning and washing both ceramics and glass is what we call thermal shock. So you certainly should not be washing it in hot water and then rinsing it in cold water. So just a few suggestions there.
Thank you.
Thank you. Before I turn the lead over to James, I'm gonna take this opportunity to really thank Stephen for volunteering his time and his huge amount of knowledge to the AUB Museum collection and for restoring it. He's been here with us for the past 10 days and we're really, really grateful for having him with us. I'm gonna turn over the lead to James Fraser, who's joining us now. James, hello, good morning.
Hello, Nadine. Hello, everybody. Thank you very much. And my apologies for not being there at 9 o'clock. I've had a few internet issues this morning, but I think we're sailing okay. My apologies to Steve in particular. Look, it's my great pleasure as the curator of the Ancient Levant at the British Museum to be chairing this session eventually. And for the next presentation, I introduce Claire Cuyaubère and Cécile. Claire is objects conservator at the Institut National du Patrimoine. She's a specialist in glass, ceramic, and enamel, and in 2020 led an emergency recovery project to the AUB's Archaeological Museum, then a glass conservation project there in 2021. Cécile is a fifth-year student in conservation at INP, specializing in glass, ceramic, and enamel, and Cécile took part in the glass conservation project in 2021 as an intern for 2 months. Claire and Cécile, over to you.
Thank you, Jamie. Hello, everyone. So I'm presenting today recovery and conservation project of archaeological glass vessels that got broken in the August 4th, 2020 explosion at the port of Beirut. Yeah, so my co-author, Cécile Rodier, couldn't join us today, unfortunately.
That's looking good, Claire. We can see your screen.
Okay, great, thank you. So we have talked about the August 4th explosion yesterday. Here at the American University of Beirut Archaeological Museum, all windows are blown by the blast. Broken window glass was scattered across exhibition spaces. No object in vitrines or in the galleries was moved or damaged, though, except for one showcase that detached from its wall and fell face down onto the marble floor. So this presents 74 glass vessels dating from Roman and medieval periods, such as bottles, bowls, cups, plates, and a mosque. As you can probably see in the picture, almost all of them show some level of degradation and iridescence. In the immediate aftermath of the blast, Dr. Nadine Panayot, who was about to step up as curator, and the Institut National du Patrimoine, or French National Institute for Cultural Heritage in Paris, put together an emergency project and received funding from ALIF, the International Alliance for the Protection of Heritage in Conflict Areas. This grant included sending 4 days, as well as the conservation supplies needed for the retrieval. While windows were replaced and broken window glass was swept from galleries, Dr. Panayot insisted that the topple case be left in place until the recovery could take place in the best possible conditions, and this protected the broken objects and fragments. The case was lifted under her and an engineer's supervision as I arrived in Beirut a month after the explosion. And it looked like when I arrived and started the recovery. Broken glass objects and shards mixed with broken modern glass from the showcase and the heavy glass shelves. Recovery was done as teamwork with Nadine and the museum assistants, and as well as some volunteer archaeologists and museology and archaeology students. So we started by setting up our workspace in the gallery next to the one in which the fallen case was located. There were two main difficulties. One was the condition of the glass shards. The vast majority of the objects showed chemical degradation, weathering, with iridescent upper layers, delamination and lifting, and as well as some hairline cracks. The second difficulty was to retrieve and identify all the shards that were mixed up and scattered across a relatively wide area without mixing them up further. So it was important to retrieve the fragments methodically and systematically, area by area, rather than jumping to recognizable larger pieces and forgetting smaller ones, which would be more difficult to link to other fragments later. Thinking of the way archaeological excavations are organized, I divided the gallery floor into 5 areas so that we would pick up all of the shards from one area, even the smallest ones, before moving on to the next area. Since we were working as a numerous team, I set a few roles for conservation and art handling best practices. In general, handling of the fragments is to be reduced as much as possible, and handling the boxes is preferred. Due to the advanced degradation of the glass, nitrile gloves had to be worn at all times to handle shards. Also because it was hot and humid weather and we were all sweating quite a bit, and otherwise our hands would have picked up all the flaking iridescent layers, and that are very important to conserve as they are part of the original glass. Objects and fragments should be kept in conservation grade boxes lined with plastazote foam to prevent them from moving and rolling. They should be placed in the box in a single layer and spaced out as much as possible. And boxes should be stored close to avoid dust accumulation. And finally, boxes should be handled using both hands. So the following method was developed for picking the shards off the floor and separating them into different boxes. First, when fragments could be recognized on the floor as being part of the same vessel, this is what you see in the lower right, and placed together in a box. And these single object boxes were marked with the object's inventory number as soon as the fragments could be matched with an object in the database. Secondly, when shards were mixed up and difficult to sort out or to recognize, they were placed together in a box to prevent the loss about their location on the gallery floor. And this is what you see on the lower center. So the area this way are identified according to the piece's location, and they are meant to serve as a stock of shards from which to look for fragments matching other objects. And finally, single object boxes were also identified with the location of the fragments on the floor, and this was done to help find missing shards in nearby area boxes later. So while fragments were being picked up from the floor, they were identified by comparing them with the AUB Archeological Museum collection database. Identification was done mostly by the museum's research assistants, who are trained archaeologists and know the collection well. I also consolidated the most unstable fragments that showed either iridescent and lifting layers or hairline cracks. Both surface and structural consolidation were done using dilute B-72, as Stephen Koob discussed earlier. And that's part of the team picking up fragments, and I hope it gives you a sense of the fragments and also the amount of modern glass mixed in that we had to separate out. And at the end of the fourth and last day of the recovery operation, we had been able to pick up all the shards from the gallery floor and to identify fragments from 73 objects out of the 74 that were in the vitrine. 2 glass vessels had been found whole and unbroken, which was both a surprise. A third object showed a couple losses and a crack, but was still mostly complete. A general assessment of the condition of the fragments was done. About 15 objects were identified as a priority for future conservation treatment because they were more complete and would be easier to reassemble. The photographs on the right of the screen show some of these priority objects along with their before the blast picture from the database. Each object or group of fragments was assessed and their level of fragility was noted on each object, on each box. And then after the recovery operation, the museum team kept working on sorting the fragments and matching them to identified objects. 2021, a second phase of the project, also funded by ALIF and organized and supported by the Institut National du Patrimoine, focused on sorting out the fragments, advanced puzzle work, and conservation treatments of some of the more complete vessels. An important part of the project was also to assess and document the condition of the objects, and then to stabilize fragments that showed structural or surface fragility. For this phase of the project, I was able to stay here for 5 weeks, while Cécile Rodier, who was then a fourth-year INP student in conservation, did a 2-month internship at the museum. During this phase, Cécile, whom you can see in the upper right, Cécile and I got a lot of help from AUB students in archaeology who sorted the fragments, tried to identify them and to match them with vessels, and helped with rehousing them for. Before doing any conservation treatment, considerable puzzle work had to be done, and then we were able to assess and document the condition of the objects before moving on to fine puzzle work, which then helped to look for more missing fragments. We created a condition report form that would help us save some time and produce consistent documentation of all vessels from the showcase that received treatment. Stabilizing lifting iridescent layers was often necessary to allow the handling of some of the fragments. And as we have seen previously, not only should these layers not be removed by surface cleaning, but it is important to preserve them as much as possible. Iridescence has actually helped us a lot to match fragments belonging to the same vessel and to find where they fit in very complex puzzles. Often we had to do the puzzle work for 2 or sometimes 3 vessels at the same time when they had very similar characteristics and were a bit mixed up. Sorry. And this is, you can see here on the lower right, two objects that were very similar in color and iridescence and had to be separated out, but worked on sort of in parallel. And then we were able to reconstruct the more complete vessels, which had been assessed as conservation treatment priorities. The British Museum had also offered to help with the recovery of the vessels after the explosion, and I'll let them talk about it in more details. But we worked on selecting objects that could travel to be treated at their Department of Conservation and Scientific Research. Choosing which objects were safe to travel were their surface and structural level of fragility, as well as the number, size, and shape of the fragments. And of course, we picked vessels that were as complete as possible and spent a lot of time searching for even the smallest fragments, since there wouldn't be a possibility to search for more shards once the object arrived at the British Museum. On the left of the screen, you can see some of the fragments that we selected. And on the right, I've put the database photographs showing the 8 objects before the blast to give you a better sense of what they looked like. We also packed the fragments for travel. They were housed individually, and for the larger and medium-sized ones, we created custom-made cavities that would support and fit them, and that would not cause any abrasion to the fragile surfaces. All of this was done with conservation-grade materials that were specially shipped to the AUB by the British Museum. And so after those 2 months, we had been able to identify the last missing object, stabilize fragments from 23 vessels, and we had made a lot of progress on sorting the shards and on the puzzle work. 12 vessels were reconstructed, and they were presented to the public along with the 2 unbroken ones in a video that the AUB Archeological Museum published on August 4th, 2021 for the first anniversary of the explosion. As you can see on the pictures, we were able to find almost all the shards on the vessels we reconstructed, which was very encouraging. And then a third phase of this recovery and conservation project started just last week with Stephen Koob and myself working together on some of the it is a much shorter phase since we've only worked for 4 days, and we'll finish some of the treatments tomorrow. But it is exciting because we have been able to work relatively quickly, thanks to the puzzle work that had already been done this summer and to Mr. Koob's expertise. So again, using Paraloid B-72 and the same techniques we've heard about in the previous presentation, we were able to reconstruct 5 vessels and to start joining fragments from 2 additional objects. And this helped us define new for future conservation treatments. We also held a one-day workshop for 7 archaeology students and graduates from the Lebanese University and the American University of Beirut. And now I want to look back on what has been accomplished so far since the explosion. So in addition to the 2 vessels that did not break in the fall, 17 objects have been reconstructed and 8 have been sent to the British Museum, where I am looking forward to work on them in the next few months. And treatment has started on 2 more vessels that still needs to be continued. So there still are fragments belonging to 47 objects that need puzzle work and conservation treatment. And I'm feeling optimistic that we can make more progress on the recovery of the showcase, hopefully still with international collaboration. And on that note, we would like to thank everyone who made this project possible here at the AUB Archeological Museum, the whole museum team, as well as the students and the volunteers, the Institut National du Patrimoine and ALIF, and the British Museum. Thank you, Stephen, for your help and your advice. And I would like also to thank Cécile Rodier, my co-author. And thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to take any question if there are some.
Thank you so much, Claire. That was really inspiring. Do we have any questions?
I have just a comment, if I may, James. I just wanted to, again, express my deep gratitude to Claire. This time around, this is her third trip to Lebanon, helping us with the restoration around. She is also volunteering her time and expertise, just like Stephen. And I would like to thank du Proche-Orient, the Institut Français du Proche-Orient, for supporting her trip and her stay with us in Lebanon. But she's been really doing an amazing job, and it looks like she will be around again and again. So we're looking forward to that. Thank you.
Thilo.
Yes, and I just would like to pick up on what I far too briefly mentioned yesterday, my very, very deep respect for the conservation work and conservators doing this. It's just amazing to see what can be done and rescued here. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Claire, the 47 vessels that have yet to be had work started on them, what's your sort of provisional assessment of those? Do you think all 47 will be restorable?
Well, they're in different situations. Some of them we've already identified them as the next priorities, and some of them we're confident that we have found almost all the shards, or most of them have very recognizable colors or patterns of iridescence and weathering, and so those would be next ones to work on. Probably a half dozen of those are already, I think, in good shape, I would say. Then there's a number of them that still needs further puzzle work. Then we start to get into the region of glass objects, same color or similar iridescence, and so puzzle work and sorting the fragments will take longer, and in general it will be necessary to spend a lot of time just doing more puzzle work. But I mean, I'm relatively confident that we can do more. Maybe, you know, not all 47, but I mean, the more we work on them, the more we see that it is. And I am like so much more optimistic than I was after the very first recovery operation. So I think we could.
Oh, that's fantastic. Any final questions for Claire? In that case, I think we will head over to our first coffee break. So find the loo, find a cup of coffee, and we'll see you back here in about half an hour.
Thank you.
Thank you, Claire. Hello, everybody. Welcome back. I find myself in a slightly strange position of introducing my own paper. However, let me just share my screen. So this next paper is part of a collaboration, and just by way of introduction, there's quite a few of us as part of this collaboration. Nadine, of course, from the Beirut side of it. From the British Museum Conservation side, Duygu Camurcuoglu and Loretta Hogan as conservators for ceramic, glass and metal, and scientists Joanne Dyer and Andrew Meek from the British Museum's Department of Scientific Research. Although only myself, Duygu and Andrew will actually speak, everyone is on hand to take questions. This paper picks up on the story of the 8 glass vessels that Claire Cuyaubère and her colleagues selected for restoration at the British Museum. I'll present a brief overview of the collaboration between the British Museum and the AUB Museum. Duygu Camurcuoglu, lead conservator, will then briefly discuss issues of conservation, and Andrew Meek, scientist for vitreous materials, will overview the scientific aspects of the project. To build on some of the analogies from yesterday, it's important that we acknowledge how this project is but one shard restoring a greater whole. As this workshop unfolds, it's exciting to learn more about the other projects that have arisen from this moment of crisis and how our combined efforts interlock. On the 5th of August, 2020, British Museum's director, Hartwig Fischer, gave the keeper of the Middle East department a call. The world was shocked by the images coming out of Beirut. What could the British Museum do to help? Over the next few weeks, Zeina Klink-Hopp, as curator for the modern Middle East, and myself, as curator for the ancient Levant, spoke with dozens of contacts and colleagues in Lebanon. And I pause here to mention one colleague with whom we spoke, Dr. Anis Shire, whose death last year has robbed Lebanon of one of its finest scholars. The key issue was to identify what British Museum assistants might look like under the advisement of our Lebanese colleagues, who of course knew what was needed most. Upon reaching out to Nadine Panayot as the newly appointed curator at the Archaeological Museum, we learned of the smash vitrine of ancient glass. The British Museum has a collection of predominantly ancient materials and was well placed to offer assistance in kind, drawing on its facilities and expertise. A new collaboration between the British Museum and the AUB crystallised around the Beirut Glass Project, celebrated in a new Memorandum of Understanding. Our initial discussions occurred in August and September 2020. The British Museum was still closed in a UK-wide lockdown, and its trustees had forbidden international travel. If UK conservators couldn't make it to Lebanon, then could some of the vessels be transported to the UK, where they could be conserved and restored in our well-equipped conservation labs? As we've heard, Claire, Nadine, and their teams selected 8 vessels for transportation based on the completeness of their profiles and the integrity of their fragments. Funding provided by the British Museum's Friends of the Middle East Department enabled Claire to remain in Beirut for an extra 10 days to continue puzzle work on these vessels and to prepare their fragments for shipping. Drawing on Claire's excellent conservation report, these vessels are Imperial Roman and early Byzantine and include a possible rare form of an early Islamic flask. The vessels arrived in London on the 16th of December last year, courtesy of Middle Eastern Airlines, who shipped the materials free of charge. Reconstructing the vessels at the British Museum complements the incredible work undertaken by the IMP and AUB teams in Beirut in June-July 2021. While shipping the vessels to the UK added significant logistical issues, and I take a moment to commend Nadine for her inexhaustible patience with this, undertaking restoration at the British Museum presents several additional opportunities, in particular 4. The first is that we can draw on the facilities and expertise of the museum's conservation laboratories, as Duygu will soon discuss. We can also draw on the facilities and expertise of the museum's scientific laboratories, as Andrew will soon discuss. And we have also built a 3-month training program into the project, and we are really super excited to welcome to the British Museum M.A. Burizik, the museum assistant at AUB. Starting mid-February, we hope, M.A. will work alongside conservators restoring the glassware, as well as receive museum-wide training as part of the museum's international training program. We acknowledge the funders of this work, principally TFAF, the European Fine Arts Foundation, who awarded the project a grant from its Museum Restoration Fund. Other funders include the Thriplow Charitable Trust, the Radcliffe Trust, the Charlotte Bonham Charter Charitable Trust, the Lecce Trust, and the Wakefield Trust. The fourth opportunity is this. Finally, we will share the restored vessels with the public as part of a single room exhibition at the entrance to the British Museum in the Room 3 Asahi Shimbun Display Gallery. This exhibition will be co-curated by Nadine, Zaina, and myself, and is scheduled for August to October 2022 to coincide or immediately follow the second anniversary of the port explosion. Before I hand over to Duygu, I reflect briefly on one of the key themes of this exhibition, which will ask the visitor to consider both the ancient and contemporary significance of these vessels and their reconstruction. Rather than leaving you with my own Australian/British words, I leave you with the words of Nadine herself, as quoted by the Financial Times. Honestly speaking, as a curator, restoring these objects does not have any meaning, but restoring them to give them a voice again, to bear witness to what was inflicted on Lebanon, that makes a whole lot of sense to me. I'll now stop sharing my screen, and Duygu, I'll ask you to share your screen and take up the paper from here.
So good morning, everyone, and Jamie gave the introductions. I am honored really to be the lead conservator managing the conservation part of this project at the British Museum in London. And we have a really good team, both in obviously in Beirut and in London. So I have no doubt that we will complete this project in a very good time, with very good feelings. And when these 8 glass vessels that we received on the 16th of December last year will be really well conserved by, I can now officially announce, I guess, and Claire already actually mentioned, by Claire Cuyaubère, our practical conservator for the glass, will be joining us very soon, I hope. So I just wanted to give you an update on the conservation side. As I said, we are waiting for Claire to join us, hopefully next month. And so 16th of December 2021, one of the staff members from our loans team actually went to the Heathrow Airport together with the Constantine art movers to receive the crate coming from Beirut, the Archaeological Museum of the AUB. Of course, we were all very excited that day, and you can see here, I just couldn't help but taking pictures of the crate being carried out. You may not know, but or some of you may know, in 2014, all the conservation and scientific research departments moved to a new made building sponsored by the Heritage Lottery Fund, World Conservation Exhibition Center. So the objects, the crates, were actually brought to the WCEC, as we call it, the World Conservation Exhibition Center. And on the 6th floor of this building, we have all our conservation laboratories, studios, and all the facilities. And you can see then once the crate arrived, I went to receive the objects crate, and Jamie joined me and some of our broadcasting team also. And you can see here the objects arrive in 6 boxes. The first confusion, we were expecting 8 glass vessels. So where are the other 2 vessels? So we have 6 boxes, of course. You can see how beautifully, and Claire mentioned in her presentation, they spent a lot of valuable time and techniques and materials on this amazing, intricate packing of most of us British Museum conservators have actually never seen before. Some colleagues came and had a look, and we were all very impressed, really happy, particularly me, seeing that objects, the fragments arrived really safe and sound to us at the British Museum. So once again, I'd like to send a big thanks to the AUB Beirut Archaeological Museum team, Claire and Nadine and everyone else, Cécile, who actually made this happen. It's wonderful. And as you can see, like Claire showed before, but for me, it was great to see also the type of packing, you know, obviously fragments individually packed, and then there were like tiny fragments sandwiched between soft foam and put in plastic bags in a very organized manner with object numbers and object images, which will help us a lot when we start actually taking the fragments from the boxes. I had on the day, had a quick look in each box and realized that some of the objects actually packed. So the boxes, some of the boxes were like two-tier packing, had two-tier packing. And so this is actually to save some space inside the crate as well. And it worked really, really well. So 8 glass vessels arrived, really safe and sound. I condition assessed them on the day very quickly, but the next day I also opened the boxes individually, and I had a detailed look just to see nothing got damaged. I did not take the fragments from their cutouts. I'm waiting for Claire to do it together, because I did not want to actually disturb the fragments yet, because there'll be a lot of kind of moving around and taking them out of the boxes. On the same day, we did some filming with our broadcasting team at the British Museum. In addition to being interviewed by Janay Bloss from the BBC, who would like to create a Radio 4 series on the story of the Beirut Glass Project. So I gave the first interview that week after the 16th of December. And as you can see, also being filmed here, by opening the boxes, and our team, I hope that they captured the first moments of meeting these amazing objects, amazing glass, Roman glass. Last week, obviously, we have been in close communication with our scientific research team. So last week, Dr. Andrew Meek, glass scientist, came upstairs, because our scientific research department are on the basement level because of particular, a lot of equipment, a lot of scientific analytical equipment in there, and they need to be kind of safe and sound, away from heat and a lot of light. So Andy came upstairs, and we went through the boxes and started actually selecting fragments from each vessel for Andy to start doing some analysis on the glass. Our next step will be, I'm looking forward for Claire to arrive at the British Museum. Also, like Jamie said, we will welcome MA in February. They'll probably more or less will coincide, we hope. And then we will all start, and my colleague Loretta Hogan from the British Museum Conservation team, we will all get together and start designing a treatment plan for 8 glass vessels, which will take about 3 months to conserve. In the meantime, like Jamie mentioned about the Room 3 exhibition at the British Museum, I am the lead conservator who will support the exhibitions team for the conservation aspects of the exhibition project. So I'm sure we will regularly update you when the time comes, how the exhibition takes place, as well as how Claire and Emma and myself and Loretta getting on with these 8 glass vessels, the conservation of these 8 glass vessels. Now I will continue with the scientific analysis part, but our colleague Andrew Meek had to pre-record his talk because of internet issues. So I will actually start playing Andrew's talk for you, but I just need to work out first.
At the British Museum, we have a wide range of analytical equipment, much of which is suited to the non-destructive analysis of objects. While these vessels are of course not complete, we would want to avoid carrying out any sort of analysis which would limit their reconstruction in any way. We have identified a complementary suite of tools to investigate the production of these objects and identify any potential decoration on their surfaces. I'll start by talking about the work which I intend to carry out. We will use a combination of surface micro X-ray fluorescence and variable pressure scanning electron microscopy. Both of these techniques can provide compositional data on the body of the fragments completely non-destructively and without requiring any surface preparation, so there is no chance of compromising the conservation work which will be carried out. We have also developed a collaboration with the Archaeological Materials Group at UCL Institute of Archaeology, led by Ian Freestone, who have recently acquired a laser ablation ICP-MS. This technique effectively takes a microscopic sample of the fragment using a laser and can analyze the composition of this sample down to trace element levels. The sample is so small that it is invisible to the naked eye and therefore, again, will not impact on the following conservation work. So what can we actually do with this data? Well, we're lucky to be working on this project at a time when a lot of the patterns of glass production for the period in which these objects were made have been explored using compositional analysis. There is now strong evidence that glass production in the earlier first millennium was focused in a small number of areas of primary production where large quantities of glass were produced and sent out to secondary production centres to be formed into objects. Later in the first millennium, glass production appears to move to a more regional model, and there are likely to have been more centres of primary production. Based on the large amount of analytical data now available, it is possible to use the levels or ratios of various elements to identify where glass objects from this period may have been made. This allows trading patterns to be suggested, and where the data available spans wide time ranges, also how these patterns may have changed and what this might mean on a wider scale of trade and cultural change. Using the data collected here at the museum, we will be able to identify the raw materials used to produce the glasses and divide them into major compositional groups. By adding in the data from the equipment at UCL, we will be able to provide a much more refined provenance and chronological data set for the different glasses used to produce these vessels. On this slide are a few examples of previous publications to show how the data can be explored and presented to assign it to production regions or more specific locations. I carried out some very preliminary analyses last week using the SEM, and we seem to have a mixture of Egyptian and Levantine glass types in the natron-based glasses, those on the left of this slide, and the plantash glass used to produce object 4536 on the right of this slide also appears to be of an Eastern Mediterranean origin. We will not only be looking at the body of the glass, but we'll also be able to use the equipment to analyze the surface of the vessels to look for any signs of decoration. And that leads me on to the second part of the project, which will be carried out by my colleague, Dr. Joanne Dyer. At least 2 of the vessels are thought to potentially be decorated in some way. They are illustrated on this slide. We will investigate potential incised decoration on object 4218 using a combination of digital microscopy and reflected transformation imaging, or RTI. These 2 techniques will allow us to look at the surface at higher magnification and light the surface from different directions to provide enhanced information about any decoration present. Object 4536 is also likely to be decorated, potentially luster painted. We will investigate this with a combination of XRF, as mentioned earlier, and RTI. We will also use digital microscopy to look for any traces of cold painting, and if these are found, we will again use XRF and also Raman spectroscopy to investigate the pigments used. This slide illustrates the types of images which can be produced using reflected transformation imaging. And you can see that the relief on a surface is greatly enhanced. So even if any incised or painted decoration has been worn down over the lifetime of the object and made difficult to see with the naked eye, this technique can allow us to produce images which reveal the form of the original decoration.
This is from Andy. So thank you very much. And if you have any questions for us, we are here to answer them.
Thank you. Are there any questions from this?
This is where we are anyway, so we will report back as we continue with the project full on from February onwards.
Sorry, can I jump in? This is Claire.
Please.
Yeah.
I was wondering if you had been able to identify objects in the British Museum collection that have very similar typology that we could use as a comparison.
Claire, we are waiting for you. You know, once you arrive, I think we have to discuss all of these things, and whatever can help you to, you know, be able to, you know, create like a plan for the conservation of the 8 glass vessel, we will then start looking into it. You know, we have a museum database, so we can easily go into it and actually start looking for, I mean, obviously at the British Museum, we have a lot of Roman glass. So we are waiting for you. We don't want to start anything before you start with us.
Just to add to that.
Okay, thank you.
Just to add to that, we don't have in the British Museum's collection much material from Lebanon itself, and certainly not in terms of glass. What we do have is quite a significant collection of similar period glass vessels from Cyprus. Now, whether they're made in Lebanon or not and have been exported to Cyprus, and in which case directly comparable, I don't know. But certainly I think there is a really good starting point, and it's a great question. Thank you.
Thanks.
I'd like to jump in just to thank really the British Museum team, James, Zaina, who got in touch with me at the onset of this project. We are truly very grateful to this institution for having offered to step in after the August blast. So we're very lucky, and we're looking forward to actually our next session. I would like to see how this is gonna conclude with the study and the analysis of the composition of the glass, because I'm really building my hopes on working more on the provenance of these objects. Yesterday, most of these objects that had been acquired prior to the 1800s have no provenance, and we are definitely looking forward on ways and means to establish their provenance by looking at their typology combined with their composition. Thank you very much for the British Museum team to joining their efforts on that, and thank you.
Well, Nadine, I think the pleasure is ours. It's a real honor to be part of this collaboration, and as you quite rightly say, having all these different strands of research coalescing together, I think, is going to make for a really interesting, broader study where we're all sort of different strands working towards one greater whole. If there are no more final questions, I'll introduce our next paper. Any final questions? Right, well, in that case, I'll move on to the next paper, which is Duygu Camurcuoglu once more. Just to give Duygu a bit more of an introduction, given that it's a single author paper. Duygu is actually Senior Inorganic Objects Conservator at the British Museum. She specializes in ceramic, glass, and metal, And of course, as you've heard, she's the lead conservator at the AUB British Museum's Glass Project, where of course she'll be joined by Claire Cuyaubère for 3 months. Duygu also has quite a track record as an archaeological field conservator, including 8 seasons at Çatalhöyük in Turkey. Her paper is drawing on something that's been quite celebrated at the British Museum about a Roman period urn. Her paper is titled Engaging Public Through the Glass, the Conservation and Filming of a Unique Romano-British Glass Urn from the British Museum. Duygu, over to you.
Thank you, Jamie. Sorry, I'm just, yeah, okay, great. So once again, good morning, everyone. Following the very interesting talks on the history and material science of glass we heard yesterday, this morning I will try to approach the topic, obviously in addition to the conservation of a Roman glass object, from the point of sharing knowledge and conservation practices and its importance with public, professional colleagues and students, particularly in these days where we have access to abundant virtual technology. So therefore, like as Jamie said, my presentation titled Engaging Public Through the Glass, the Conservation and Filming of a Unique Romano-British Glass Urn from the British Museum. So the British Museum has a large number of international traveling exhibitions worldwide. And one of these are the Rome City and Empire exhibition. This exhibition covers the stories of Rome and its vast empire, which continued to captivate and intrigue people almost 3,000 years after its foundation. It brings together more than 200 British Museum objects, most engaging and beautiful Roman objects, to tell the story of how Rome grew from a series of small villages to become a mighty empire. Currently, this exhibition in China at Suzhou Museum until the October 2022, and most of us at the British Museum conservation team, we actually worked on several objects for this ongoing international traveling exhibition. Okay, so here you can see some of the glass objects, some of the beautiful glass vessels who's traveling with the Rome City and Empire exhibition. And here, this one here is the subject of my talk today. So basically, as you can see me, you know, like a screenshot from the one of the videos itself. So this is a Romano-British glass scenery urn. It's a mold-blown blue-green glass vessel. It was found in Sittingbourne in Kent, in the UK, in a cemetery site, and it was dated to either the 1st or the 2nd century AD. Talking to the curator and also doing some investigation into the history of the vessel, it turned out that it was one of the largest scenery urns found in the continent, and it presented a great example of Romano-British cremation practices. There were actually bones in it as well when it first arrived to the museum. However, for conservation reasons, it was removed. They were removed, the bones, and they were stored separately. This vessel was previously conserved in the 70s. It's a very thick and heavy glass, and there was some evidence of tie lines on its neck, possibly of a lid or a stopper. When I first did the assessment, conservation assessment for this urn, I actually could not find a conservation treatment record for it immediately. So I decided that it's since the possibly the previous it was previously conserved in the 70s, it was the time for it, and it was about 2016 for its conservation treatment to be renewed for traveling over 5 years or even more. So when I first started working on the object, the curator for the object kindly put me in charge of the whole project. So not only the conservation of the vessel, but also communicating with public via social media appearances and filming. As I mentioned, the investigation into the curatorial and conservation history of the object resulted no immediate previous conservation record. But after kind of digging around a little bit more, I found a record of another glass vessel with the same year of registration, a very similar one to this one, mentioning that the object was conserved in the 70s with cellulose nitrate. And this is why I kind of more or less thought that this vessel might also have been conserved during the same period in the 70s. And I involved the broadcasting team at this stage to follow the conservation process throughout. I believe that this would be a great object and the project to share with the public from a conservator's eye. Here you can see the vessel, the glass urn before conservation, and these images are during dismantling. And this is after this very heavy and thick glass after being dismantled. So discussions, we discussed the whole project with the broadcasting team, and we decided to create a 10-part series following the conservation procedures on the glass urn. Obviously, I could not finish the conservation of this object just in a week. So that would make more sense to turn this into an ongoing video series. We decided to film each stage of my treatment on the urn, starting with the introduction to the curatorial and conservation history of the object, then the investigation into previous conservation treatments, preparation for dismantling, the actual dismantling process, scientific analysis on the glass, reconstruction of the urn, making gap fills, also some techniques like mold making and resin casting, color matching, and completion of the urn. During the filming, I also emphasized, because it's very important, I believe, the importance of communication with colleagues and taking advice from colleagues who have past experiences with certain method of conserving glass objects, such as in this case of dismantling the glass urn. Because the urn itself was quite kind of sound as an object, and the surface of it could withstand, was strong and could withstand an acetone immersion, acetone bath. The reason I did that because, as I said, the cellulose nitrate as an adhesive, even if it's quite an old one, it might be possible to actually dissolve it via the regular applications of acetone, but could be in different methods. So after a week of trying with acetone poultices and putting it in an acetone bath, unfortunately, I did not get any quick results. And obviously, like in every project, and this was a kind of exhibition project, I had a deadline as well. But then talking to colleagues and just out of a normal kind of chat, somebody suggested me to try warm water, who actually saw this method done by a colleague years ago, maybe again in the 70s or 80s. So I decided to do it, and this was warm water. And as soon as I placed the urn into warm water, I'm not joking, only like a few seconds, the whole thing started being dismantled. Of course, you know, whether I already helped the old adhesive to kind of soften up by putting it in the acetone bath with poultices. I don't know whether this helped or not, but I was amazed to see that this is what warm water did at that time. So I made sure that I emphasized, again, as I said, the importance of talking to colleagues and getting advice from them as and when needed. And here you can see the reconstruction process of the glass urn. It was a challenge in itself because, as I said, the glass fragments were extremely thick and heavy. But it was still manageable. And here you can see after the reconstruction, the gap filling process and making fills. I evaluated different materials for reconstruction of the urn, of course. For example, I actually also contacted Mr. Koob about his Paraloid B-72 recipe, which has many benefits in terms of glass reconstruction in comparison to generic lab-made Paraloid. And he very, very kindly sent me some samples for experiments with to make a final decision on what adhesive to use on the urn. It was also quite challenging to be filmed while carrying out the treatments. Time gaps between the videos due to how well and quickly each step of the treatment worked. As you can see here, I'm actually making some 2 parts silicone rubber molds later on to cast some resin fills. And this was a stressful process in itself because I had to make a lot of them, and you know, it takes time to prepare everything and do the treatment. But like this, such as making molds, casts, like dismantling the actual urn, which as I mentioned, it took time. Anything could go wrong during the filming, and you know, filming is stressful as it is in many cases. You know, such as like wrong chemical calculations, being nervous during filming, things not working, and resulting waste of time, energy, and materials. So as a conservator, I wasn't only working on a challenging conservation treatment, but also I took on another challenge of trying to manage this with filming and actually creating quite comprehensive and friendly videos for public. Here you can see after I created the silicone rubber 2-part molds, and this is the kind of plaster cast that first I made. You can see here, this is you know, how I created it using dental wax as a backing material, and then from this plaster cast I created the 2-part silicone rubber mold, which would then again be used to cast the resin. And of course, like I said, each step of the treatment was filmed, and you can see here some screenshots from the episode 8, mold making and resin casting, and I made sure that I explained everything in detail to share with everyone out there to how to create certain parts of a conservation treatments. I also talked about, like, yes, individual treatment techniques, materials used, evaluations between conservation materials, and what to do, what not to do on this type of archaeological glass vessel. Here, these are the stages of me actually doing the resin casting. I used Araldite 2020 epoxy resin to cast the gap fills, and you can see after they're actually placed onto the glass urn. I worked with a very helpful, supportive, and professional broadcasting team leading the whole process. They understood what the treatment entailed, what the conservator felt, and how I worked throughout filming and the treatment. Of course, we had to do some several takes for some episodes, making sure that each step of the treatment is clearly explained to public by using a less technical and friendly language. I also wanted to do like a separate episode for coloring the for coloring the gap fills, because we had to in this case, and there are different methods of coloring gap fills. And I thought, this could be something that people can really enjoy, because obviously color is around us always, and people love color and doing things with color. So I made sure that this is a kind of separate episode where I focus on using different kind of acrylic colors to create the same hue as the original glass urn has. A bit like Bob Ross, really. I don't know if you are familiar with his program, but the painter who actually teaches you how to paint in a very friendly way. So I hope that lots of people enjoy this very colorful episode. And as a general practice at the British Museum, we always worked with this scientific research department, scientists, part of the conservation process. And it was also the case with the glass urn, and it was great to show public how conservation and material science worked well together. As I mentioned, yes, this is a general practice for us conservators and scientists at TBM to work together to deeply understand the object materials, manufacturing methods, provenances by using several analytical techniques beyond binocular microscopes. This helps to create object stories which connects us to objects even more. This is the kind of after conservation image of the glass urn. And here, hopefully it will work now. I want to show you the episode 5, where Andy and I, who, again, we're working together in the Beirut Glass Project. Andy and I analyzed one of the glass fragments from this urn, and Andy actually showed us some interesting information about the urn. So I will click on it now and hopefully it will work. Let's see.
My name's Andrew Meek. I'm a scientist here at the British Museum, and my specialism is glass and other vitreous materials like enamels and faience. Because Duygu had taken the glass urn apart, it was possible for her to bring me a small piece of it, and I could use that small piece to put into the scanning electron microscope beside me. So this is the fragment which Duygu brought for me to analyse, and I've just mounted it between some aluminium blocks here. You need to be able to see a flat surface from the top for this equipment to be able to work. So you'll be able to see across here is where the analysis is going to happen. Okay, so this is the mounted glass fragment, which I'm going to put into the chamber of the electron microscope. This equipment is able to give very high magnification images of small objects and also tell you about the chemical composition of the object. And using the data which we find from this technique, we can say a little bit about how the object might have been made or where it might have come from as well. So these are the results of the compositional analysis of this glass fragment. And you can see from these, it's got a very high sodium level, which is something consistent with all Roman glass production. But the fact that it has low magnesium and potassium levels means that it was produced with a mineral salt known as natron, which is something that forms, it's an evaporite mineral that forms around lakes. So as the salt evaporates out, you end up with these blocks of this stuff called natron. And you add that to the sand, and that's how you make glass. And this composition is completely consistent with glass that's known to have been produced on the Eastern Mediterranean coast. We can't really tell from this where the urn itself was made, but we know that the glass certainly has travelled a very, very long way from the Eastern Mediterranean to the UK. We can also see from these results as well that there are no extra colorants that were added to the glass. The Romans were able to make glass of lots of different colors by adding different metals or other elements to their glass, like copper. But in the case of this glass, we found that it only contains a small amount of iron, which causes the colour. And this iron wasn't an intentional addition to the glass, it just was present in the beach sand that was used to produce it. So that's why a lot of Roman glass is this kind of colour. It's just the iron that was present in the raw materials. It's not a conscious decision. They were just probably happy with the colour that it ended up being.
Well, unfortunately, the video didn't work greatly, but I think at least you could hear all the information that Andy was given. Oops, sorry. Okay, so this 10-part YouTube video series obviously was the first one created by the BM broadcasting team on the conservation work for a specific object. And the videos received a lot of positive attention, both from public, professionals, and students globally. You can see here some comments from the public I actually collected from the videos on YouTube. And also, I didn't know initially, after we produced these videos and they broadcasted them, I didn't know. But then when I started meeting some of my colleagues worldwide, they started telling me that they're actually using these videos, particularly in academia, when they are, when they teach glass conservation to conservation students. And I was very happy to hear this. In fact, one of my colleagues, Dr. Stavroula Golfumitsou from the University of Gothenburg, mentioned that these videos actually stand out quite a lot from the other educational videos available, and they help students understand conservation as a creative, ever-evolving practice. These virtual outlet for the British Museum conservation team to showcase our specialized work. Following this success, broadcasting team decided to film other conservation projects as a video series. So this is my talk, and I would like to thank the Archaeological Museum of AUB and the AUB itself for inviting us to present at the Through Shattered Glass workshop. I also would like to thank the British and Early European Prehistory and the Scientific Research Departments and our broadcasting team at the British Museum. You can see here, if any of you are interested to look at these 10 episodes, this is the link on YouTube. And also, if you follow us on Instagram under this account, the Conservation Focus, I will be posting updates on the Beirut Glass project regularly. So you can follow the project also from there. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much, Duygu. I mean, we're always told never, ever read the comments on a YouTube video, but in this case, they seem overwhelmingly positive.
Yeah, I was scared at the beginning, to be honest with you, to read them. But yes, they were very positive. Was
there anything in the comments that surprised you in terms of how the public focused on any particular aspects about the conservation that they responded to well or with surprise themselves?
I think they were a lot interested in basically the fact that, first of all, we actually conserve it. Because I guess when you look at the glass urn, it looked fine, actually. So some of them were like, why do you need to? And also some of them commented on the filmmaking to fill the missing areas on the glass, which again, it was interesting because I didn't know whether these people have any experience with this type of work, but they still actually think about it. They still make a comment about it. So, but I did not receive anything that really worried me,
That's great. Thank you so much. That's fantastic. Are there any other questions for Duygu?
It's not a question. I'd like to jump in just to talk about our experience as well. I mean, when we started picking up these shards from the floor, the communication office at AUB jumped in and started filming us. And then they also put us live on Facebook and Instagram. First, we were scared, like Duygu. We got really scared first time. As archaeologist and museum curator, I'm particularly not very used as well to being on film or on social media. So the whole idea was a bit scary. But then the amazing part was the comfort. Of course, there are always people who try to criticize because you never know what to expect. When you open yourself out to social media, then there's no limit to critics, but there's also, by the same token, no limit for support. And this turned out to be a very healing experience, because as doing this recovery work with Claire, we were receiving a lot of support from our global audience, and this was quite surprising. We would surely did not expect that. But the lesson learned from all of that is the importance of transparency. And here I join Duygu on the fact that it's very useful to post, not to be scared, to show how you are doing your recovery and your restoration work, because there is no secret about that. And the more knowledge we build on each other's experience, the better. That's what I believe. And that's why I think that transparency is the best way out. Thank you very much. Anyway, Duygu, it was a very inspiring talk.
Thanks, Nadine. I agree with everything you said. Definitely. We need to be out there more. Definitely.
Any other questions or comments?
Yes, this is Claire again.
Claire.
Well, first, congratulations on the videos and on your talk. I had watched the videos, I think, when they came out, and with all my colleagues, we were very impressed with it.
Thank you.
So my question was it a concern that you had, or maybe a question at least, of how much information you put out about specific materials you use or specific techniques? Did you have any worry about maybe people this at home or something? How did you go about it?
To be honest with you, this particular case study, I did not feel worried at all. Maybe because that from the beginning, I felt quite safe, with the broadcasting team, with everyone supporting this idea of filming and putting it out there. So in normal circumstances, yes, I may be a little worried of people start, doing glass conservation by themselves. But I think people also do, Claire. We probably don't know, but people do all sorts of things to their objects at home, or or whatever. In the UK, we have the metal detectorists, and this is a very kind of open to everyone thing here, and they find things and they just get on with it. If they're going to do something to their objects, I rather show them how and what to do it, rather than they try to find some methods themselves and damaging, some information and value to the objects, they have or they found. And also, as the British Museum, it's been a long time now. We put all the information out there, our conservation treatment records actually online. So everyone can go onto the collections online, and you can actually see what the conservators, how we are treating the British Museum objects. I think, of course, that also relaxed me a little bit, but I don't know. I think I just jumped into this particular project, without any judgments, any worries. So I just, with the help of the broadcasting team, I just went with it. And from the people I've heard, the outcome was good and safe, and but maybe some people took some ideas and developed it themselves. But, when you put things on social media, there's a slight risk to take anyway.
Right, and it was fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you.
We've got a couple more minutes. Any final questions or comments?
It's me, Randa Smadi.
Mrs. Smarty, how are you?
Hello again, Jamie. And thank you very much for all these presentations. I was just asking myself, what would you do if there is one piece missing? Would you reconstruct a new one, or what would you do?
In this particular case, it would all depend on where it is. Also, because I was dealing with a thick glass, and its edges were quite sharp as well. Any edges that there were no fragments, there were missing fragments. So where would the missing fragments be? Whether the area that there's a gap, it's any danger to the object itself or anyone who will be handling it, the size of the missing area, the missing fragment. So all these factors would play a role. And also I would always talk to the creator of the glass and discuss and see whether it is absolutely necessary to do this, unless there's like a kind of, like I said, like a health and safety issue, or there would be an issue for the glass, So via discussion, I would make a decision by considering these factors. I could or I could not. It would all depend on.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Duygu. And just as one final comment, the production team that made the video of the Roman urn that Duygu was talking about, they're the same production team that will make a video, of course, for the Beirut Glass collaborative project between AUB and the British Museum. And footage has already been recorded by Nadine and by Claire and Emma and their colleagues in Beirut. And that footage has been shared with the production team in London, who will continue with the story as the 8 vessels in London get reconstructed by Claire and Duygu. And eventually that video, apart from being shared online, will also be part of this Room 3 temporary exhibition later on this year. But that brings us to the 1:30. So in that case, it behooves me to thank all of our speakers from these last several papers. And I hand over to Thilo to continue the events. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you, Jamie, for putting us on the landing spot on, precision timing. And it's clearly a very well-run workshop here. And it's my big pleasure to lead now through the last 2 substantive papers of this workshop, which will focus mostly on material science and computer vision, picking up what we have done so far, what we understand, where we are, and trying to look forward now, what to do here in Beirut. And it's of course crazy if I say here in Beirut, being in Nicosia, unfortunately. But what we try with the colleagues at the AUB and beyond is to develop some own approaches to this in collaboration with our colleagues and partners. Yes, it's on investigating antique glass artifacts of the AUB Archeological Museum using material science techniques by Professor Malek Tabbal, Mohamad Roumié, and as an honorary member or forward-looking member myself here as well. Malek Tabbal, to introduce him properly, is Professor of Physics at the AUB and director of the 2 large scholarship programs, the USAID University Program and the Abdullah Al-Khouair Foundation for Education STEM program. He is actually an alumnus of AUB, homegrown talent, received his Bachelor of Science and Masters of Science from AUB, before then going for a PhD in Montreal in Canada, with followed on with a postdoctoral fellowship in Quebec as well, and then coming back to AUB 1997. Malek has won several awards that include the Arab Fund for Social Economic Development Distinguished Scholar and the Lebanese National Council for Scientific Research Excellence Award, as well as, and that's very important, I think, the Teaching Excellence Award from AUB. He held several key positions at AUB, such as the Associate Dean of the Faculty of Arts and Sciences, and also Director of AUB's Leadership for Equity and Diversity Initiative. Now, his own research expertise lies in thin films and nanomaterial physics, growth and characterization. However, beyond that, he leads AUB's Applied Physics Research Group in laser and plasma-assisted synthesis of functional analysis, functional materials, and is also involved in a research collaboration with the Lebanese Commission of Atomic Energy, where, and here it gets interesting for us now, he is studying pottery excavated from Tyre using ion beam analysis techniques. And this is something we are now extending to glass. And for that, he has recently joined the project here with the AUB Archaeological Museum, using material science characterization techniques on those antique glass artifacts. So, Malek, over to you for our talk.
Okay. Thank you very much, Thilo. First of all, I'd like to say that it is absolutely fantastic to be here. I personally am new to this, but I'm extremely excited at collaborating with the local, regional, and international partners on this truly crucial and unique. I'm particularly happy to have next to me a long-term collaborator and friend, Dr. Mohamad Roumié, from the Lebanese National Council for Scientific Research. And I will be giving the first part of the talk, and Mohamad will be giving the second part. And again, thank you, Thilo, for joining us in this effort. We've been talking with Thilo online, unfortunately, for several months now, and his assistance has been absolutely crucial in shaping up this project. I don't want to spend too much time. I know time is tight, but I'd like to, in addition to the organizing committee and AUB and all the partners for giving us this opportunity to present what we have here in Lebanon at AUB and at the CNRS in not far from here. I would like to single out two people. I would like to particularly thank Nadine, first of all. Without you, we wouldn't be here. It's an incredible effort by you and your team. And I would also to single out one perhaps of the unsung heroes of this workshop, Jihad Touma, chair of the physics department, with his drive and belief in us, especially me as an experimental physicist, in a very difficult couple of years that we've been going through here in Lebanon. Okay, I'm going to move on. So very quickly here, I believe Thilo, Mohamad, and I discussed the presentation, and it's going to be essentially an informative presentation about what is available here locally in Lebanon. And when I say here locally, at AUB, we have scientific equipment that we have been using for many, many years to investigate materials and films and coatings and nanomaterials for many, many years. And these are the same tools that are heavily used in archaeology and cultural heritage. So for us, it is the logical transition to use our expertise in these tools and to serve the community of archaeologists, those who are interested in cultural heritage. And obviously, this is not only local to Lebanon, but this is regional and international. So very quickly, we have at AUB, which in our of Physics. There is the Central Lab, which is a multi-million-dollar research facility, which was set up about almost 20 years ago, but it has been funded. It has received sustained funding over the years. So we have a scanning electron microscope, a Raman spectroscopy setup, and this is like 5 minutes walk from where we are now. Okay, and also our collaborators at the Lebanese Atomic Energy Commission, they have the very important X-ray fluorescence portable handheld system, in addition to nuclear techniques, and the CNRS, the Lebanese Atomic Energy Commission, is, I would say, 10 minutes drive from here, under, well, if there's no traffic. Okay, so it may take a bit longer on heavy traffic days. Okay, but I do recall that we've been working with those folks for many, many years, and I do remember spending long nights at the center. And at night, there is no traffic, so the ideal time to do it. Anyway, I'm going to move on. So I'm not going to this introduction, but now we all know, and I'm very, very happy that we had the chance to listen to the colleagues at the British Museum just before us that have also shown us some of the state-of-the-art high-tech equipment that they have, that they will be using to analyze these materials. So it's very good to hear that, to see some complementarity and some possible potential collaboration with those scientists at the British Museum, as they have these very advanced tools, some of which we obviously cannot afford in Lebanon, like the laser ablation mass spectrometer. Okay, so needless to say that studying these materials with those advanced tools essentially allows us to have an understanding about their origin, authenticity, and making. And what we are proposing here, and again, it was essentially the idea that was initiated by Jihad and Nadine, is to combine the capabilities, expertise, and resources in a collaborative project in order to study the chemical composition of glass objects that were shattered by the Beirut explosion. So what we have here at AUB is we have the scanning electron microscope, which gives you a very high magnified image of the sample that you are studying. There is a multitude of information that you can collect from such an analysis, and you see here a diagram of the electron beam that is interacting with the sample. And there are a variety of particles that are emitted, like the secondary electrons that are essentially allow us to see the shape of the material. The backscattered electron, which essentially allow the elemental identification, and this is, I guess, the most valuable thing here. And the X-ray, actually, it's the X-ray which emitted from these interactions that allow us to determine the elements that are present in the material. These are not our results. This is something that I've seen in the literature recently. It's an ancient glass bead, and you can see here the glass bead, and you can, because the electron beam can be focused to a specific point, okay, you can determine the composition of the sample at different locations, and you get a signal here, and these peaks corresponds to various elements that are in the material, and you can push the analysis a bit further, and you can actually do some kind of an elemental mapping, okay, of, for example, the bead here with the different colors, which gives you an overall picture of the chemical composition that is of the bead or of the sample. This is our Tescan Mira scanning electron microscope with the EDX attachment, which allow us to determine essentially the elemental composition of the sample. Okay. So this is, I guess, this is the main instrument that that we will be using for these analyses. And we've also discussed with Thilo that there is a significant amount of sample preparation and expertise that we need to develop to make sure that we use these instruments to their maximum potential. Additionally, perhaps these are not as common in our applications as the scanning electron microscope and the EDX attachment is Raman spectroscopy that is also available. I just saw at the British Museum. So this is a setup that has been home built here at AUB, and it allows essentially to look at phases of particulates that could be present in the glass. Also, we have the possibility of focusing the laser beam, so we can get local information by scanning the laser beam at different places on the sample to do some kind of mapping of the information. The third piece of equipment that is also available at AUB, it's our X-ray diffractometer. This is perhaps not very commonly glass because in X-ray, in XRD, you are essentially looking at crystalline materials, but also you may have some crystalline particulates inside the material also detect by XRD, and this diffractogram that you see right here is indeed taken from an ancient glass sample, which confirms the presence of crystalline fluoride phases inside the material. So this is very quickly what we have available. This is what have been using for many years on our own samples that we produced at AUB. Here there's an opportunity to make use of these techniques on archaeological sample, in particular glass. Now I'm going to give the floor to Mohamad, okay, who is going to present what is available in the Research Council, the Lebanese Atomic Energy Commission.
So good morning, everyone. So I'm also happy to be part of. Thank you for inviting me. And I'm also proud to this sustainable collaboration with AUB, especially with the physics department. So I will talk about the available technique and equipment that we have and that can be of help for the community of archaeologists. Since we have let's say about 15 or 18 years experience on working with some archaeologists in Lebanon. So the first technique that we intend to use maybe for this project of glass to analyze chemically the elemental composition, to characterize chemically the elemental composition of glass, it is X-ray fluorescence. So, and we have it handheld, as you will see in the next slide. It is a portable XRF. So the X-ray fluorescence, it's a way to excite atoms that compose the target or object, and we send a primary beam. It can be electron, ions, or it can be X-ray. So in this technique, we use X-ray as primary beam to excite the atoms. So this energetic X-ray will interact at the atomic level of the object, ejecting an electron from an inner shell, in this picture, and it will leave the atom in an excited state. So to return to its fundamental state or to de-excite the atom, so an electron from the outer shell can see, and this procedure will be accompanied by an emission of characteristic X-ray. So this X-ray, so each element in the periodic table characteristic X-ray, and in this way we can identify, let's say, first of all, in qualitative analysis, what elements are in this target. And at the second stage, the intensity of this X-ray signal can inform us about the concentration or the quantity of this particular element in the target. So this is a handheld. So we can use it and you can point it on the surface of any object. You can hand it by your hand, and you can point it on the surface of any object. And you can make a rapid or fast analysis. So in 1 minute, maybe you can have access to most of the elements that composing this target. This is stainless steel, but you can have also another example. So you can see here, you have the main composition, nickel, chromium, and iron. You have trace element like molybdenum, copper, or chromium, not the chromium, molybdenum, and manganese. So recently we have received a reference material of glass from Thilo, provided by Thilo. So I did first measurement on that using our handheld XRF analyzer. So you can use it, you can hand it by hand, but you can also use it as benchtop. So we can place the glass on the top here, and you can make the analysis as in any laboratory measurement. And the good thing that we have a good agreement for most of the elements that are composing this glass reference material, with some exception. But since we are intending to use it as a relative, we want to make a relative comparison between the different. So you can group together the elements or the fragment that have similar composition. So even if you have not so precisely element measured, but the same maybe error can be translated to the other element. For relative comparison, it will be a good thing. For more advanced analysis, for absolute maybe determination of elemental composition, we can use ion beam analysis techniques. It's part of nuclear analytical techniques, but it needs heavy equipment, unlike the portable XRF. And these techniques were extensively already used for application in archaeology, environment, and in material science. So in archaeology, we have done a lot of projects with some local and foreign archaeologists on the determination of the elemental composition and for the attribution or for the provenance of ceramics, but not only for ceramic, it was done also for some coins. Till now, unfortunately, we didn't have any project for glass, but I am happy to start this kind of project on glass. So the link between these two techniques, so we can use the portable XRF in order to make a pre-selection maybe of that for more precise analysis can be done in the laboratory. So we can reduce the number of samples instead of having thousands of samples to be analyzed in the lab. Maybe we can have around 50 or 100 to be analyzed in the lab. So use of this handheld can be as alternative, appropriate, or maybe to complement in order to pre-select samples to be analyzed at the lab. So this is the equipment that we have. It is heavy. So comparing this handheld and this heavy equipment. So these techniques, what it is called the ion beam analysis techniques, are fast, not as fast as the handheld, but it is relatively fast comparing to other techniques at the lab. So maybe in 10, 20 minutes, you can have access to most of the elements that composing the object, archaeological object, if you want. It is multi-elemental. At the same time, you can have the same element. And you can have sensitivity up to part per million. So you can have the major, minor, and trace elements of the target. And it is non-destructive analysis. So non-destructive between brackets, because till now we have to put in a vacuum system. So maybe you have to sample, you have to take a fragment. But I will talk later about updating this kind of equipment, what we will have. So what will be happening when a fast moving or ions are interacting with the target in similar way to the electron or to the primary X-ray? It is at the atomic level, but it can be also at the nuclear level. So the most important technique that we will focus on, it is the PIXI technique. It is proton-induced X-ray emission. It is very, and we can have the elemental composition of most of the element that composing the target, from sodium to uranium. Below sodium, we can use its sister technique called PIG, proton-induced gamma ray emission, but instead to excite the atom, we can excite the nucleus. But in the same way, we can have a characteristic, not X-ray, but gamma rays. So we can have access also to lighter elements than sodium. Also, we can have a third technique that it is package of this ion beam analysis technique. It's called Rutherford backscattering. In this way, you can have, if you have a glazed ceramic, for example, you can study the composition of this glazed layer and its thickness and the depth profile of elements. So sometimes when it is needed, it can be used simultaneously in order to have complementary information about the study. So let's start with our case study. It is about a PIXI analysis of medieval silver coin. It is from Tunisia. Several coins were collected belonging to different dynasties. So the fineness and the composition of silver in these coins can tell us about the wealth of the dynasties, successive dynasties. So the wealthier that dynasty is, the more the silver is inside these coins. Also, we did a lot of studies on ceramics, specifically on ceramics. So this is our first study back to 2003, 2004. It was about studying provenance of carrot in France. So by doing elemental composition using PIXI technique and statistical methods, it was we had identified that those carrot amphora found in southern France belonging to a Beirut production at the Roman period. So jumping to glass. So as I said, we can combine these nuclear techniques. Sometimes it is needed to combine PIXI and PIGA technique, especially for sodium. So if you have, for example, unearthed glass and you have alterated surface, so the sodium cannot by its X-ray signal, because its X-ray signal, it has a very low energy. It's about 1 kilo electron volt. So you can excite it, but this X-ray cannot escape from the surface to arrive to the detector. So you cannot detect it as you can PIXI spectrum. But by excite the nucleus, you can excite you can have gamma characteristic which has 440 keV. So it is 400 times stronger than its X-ray. And you can detect it, and you can, without doing any sampling and without doing any polishing of the glass, you can detect the content of the sodium. And I know it is very important glass. So usually it is from 10 to 20% inside a glass. So our future plan, it is to have an external microbeam. So it is already started, but these 2 years of COVID prevented to be complete. So to have this external microbeam in a similar way or with to the setup that exists at the Louvre Museum, so at Aglaé. So you have an accelerator there dedicated for archaeology application. And in this way, you can make analysis of sample of any shape, bulky object without doing any sampling for it. So you can put in front of the beam in air, and you can make the analysis. You will not doing any destruction of this object. So beside this project, we have also a future project about acquiring a laser ablation ICP-MS. So thanks to the International Atomic Energy Agency, which is helping us since 20 years, more than 20 years, in acquiring state-of-the-art equipment. So it is a cycle of every 2 years, we have a new project. So this updating of this accelerator, it is done through what it is called technical project with the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency. So through this TC project, also we will acquire maybe the laser ablation ICP-MS. So this is my last slide before leaving the last one, since we are here at the AUB. So it is a coordinated research project. It is also funded by the IAEA. It is about facilitating experiment with ion beam accelerator. And it is open to also the communities. So if you are an archaeologist from outside Lebanon, since we have already the equipment. So if you are from a country, neighboring country outside Lebanon, and you have proposal for doing analysis on glass, on ceramics, on coins, whatever, you can apply for this kind of project. And by common discussion with us, we can finishing this project together, we can make a proposal together. So we are part of 8 regional centers around the world doing this kind of CRP coordinated research project. So a friend, maybe in neighboring country, so it can be applied for that. And the last word for Malek.
Thank you very much, Mohamad. Well, aims and perspective. I think since we're running short on time, we don't want to upset the organizers or our next speaker. I think we're going to stop here, and maybe we'll have the chance to discuss perspectives, which is coming up. The only thing I want to mention is this our willingness to participate in collaborative project and our dire need for funding in order to set up such long-term sustained projects. So with this, we're done. Thanks again, Mohamad. Thank you very much, Thilo.
Thank you. Well done, Malek, Mohamad. It's very exciting to see all the possibilities evolving here. So it's really very much looking forward to that. Also in collaboration with the colleagues in Britain, maybe in France as well, as you mentioned, the Aglaé, the Louvre Lab. There are so many possibilities to collaborate, which is one of the strengths in archaeological research, of course. But we are a little bit behind time, I'm afraid, so no time for questions now. And I would like to now introduce Danielle Asmar, associate professor, to give the talk leveraging augmented reality and computer vision in the reconstruction of the damaged glass relics. Daniel Asmar is associate professor in mechanical engineering at the AUB. He received his PhD in systems design engineering from the University of Waterloo in Canada and does his research in robotics and computer vision. He has interests in visual perception, autonomous robot navigation and mapping, environmental representation and recognition, augmentation techniques in archaeology, and segmentation methods in computer vision. I have to admit, I'm not quite sure that I understand all of that, but that's why we have the specialists. And he has published over 100 publications in these areas in referee journals and conference proceedings. Since 2010, he has an increasing interest in digital cultural heritage, leveraging his knowledge in computer science to help address problems in the cultural heritage field. So from 2010 to 2014, he led a project in that. And since 2014, he has been leading another MedGaims project, which were funded by the ENI CBC Mediterranean, and in which extended reality and gamification applications in cultural heritage are developed. So, Daniel, if I may ask you to tell us all about it, please.
For the introduction, much appreciated. Thank you, the organizers, for inviting me. Nadine, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you. So first, a disclaimer, I'm by no means an expert, actually just my first time working with glass. So it's really nice hearing all about glass and what can be done with glass and the problems with glass. And I'm sure working or trying to apply some of our techniques, I'm in for some big surprise what can be done and what can't be done. So for the intent of my talk today, the first couple of slides will be redundant. I've seen all this, but it motivates me really to see some of these pictures, starting with, I mean, any problem that you want to work with, you want to make sure it's relevant, it's important, and it's difficult. And this, by all means, is all of these three. The importance of what happened way back in 2019 is evident from us all being here today, and all of the various talks that we've had on the issues. So we at MSFEA, given that archaeology is a topic close to my heart, I felt that maybe I could do something little, or our group could do a little bit to help address this problem, maybe within a couple of months, or produce some techniques from computer science that might help in the reassembly of some of these artifacts. So I was saying that the problem in itself is one of sorting and the other one of reassembly. It's more the reassembly task that we're hoping we can give some aid. So, okay, now it's not moving here. All right. One of the, or two of the constraints that we're going through here is that, I mean, leading to our intervention is that the problem in itself is delicate. And we've seen from today that trial and error can lead to even more damage. So we were hoping to introduce a technique that can help reduce these trial and error attempts from this task, which is a 3D puzzle reconstruction task, maybe by introducing some digital models or digital or computer models to represent these and maybe attempt to do the tasks via a computer before or using that as an aid for the renovator to use while they're renovating their parts. So this is the level at which we're hoping to intervene. Can we, in effect, produce a computer model or an aid using augmented reality for the renovator to use that visor or goggle or hardware to direct that person into the correct placement of the different parts on the stand of renovation where they're renovating that part, so that we reduce as much as possible the trial and error in the renovation issue. Okay, so to do that, there are different components that are needed. The first one, idea of this pipeline is, first of all, we have to recreate 3D models of the shards, these broken glass pieces, and generate these 3D models for the parts. And the second part, in software, we want to reassemble these shards into a digital twin of the original relic. Now, that can be done either automatically, and to automate the process, it really becomes a research problem, and I'll talk about that in a bit. Then finally, once we have the shards and we have the digital twin of the original piece or part that is broken of the relic itself, then we want to use augmented reality as a guide elevation of that relic. That's really that's the big picture of how I am trying to help with this process. So the first part, talking about, I'm not going to go into detail, but it's important for people who are not in the field to understand when we talk about 3D reconstruction using photogrammetry, and we use these available online as black boxes, but it's important to know the most important failure method of SFM, which is really the underlying technology which we use to do a 3D reconstruction of artifacts. So what happens is that the object that you see here, this 3D object here, produce it or create a 3D model of it, you take various pictures from different viewpoints. So these little symbols here are the cameras taking pictures of that object. And then on the part itself, you try to identify salient points, features that we call them, in the 3 images. In this case, we have 3 images. And then based on what you can see from different viewpoints, you perform, first thing you do is you perform an estimation of the rotation and translation between the cameras, taking those pictures between scene 1, scene 2, and scene 3. And at the same time, you use all this information to estimate the depth of the object seen. So that's the first step that you do, is to really find R's and T's and the depth of the objects. And then once you can do that, this representation of the object, as a result, you get really the 3D digital twin of that object. So I'm stopping at this slide here, pausing at this slide to reinforce the fact that for structure of motion to work, or for this technique to work, you really need salient points on the it's not going to have many features, and you have to do something to that glass to be able to reconstruct that in 3D. Again, this here is an example of what we need to do. You have here is 2 pictures of a building. What you need to do is find the features on one building and its corresponding features on the other. And once you can find those features, you can triangulate through the images that you have to produce the 3D model of that object. So a good example, which is way back in 2010, what they did is Agrawal et al., they took a bunch of pictures from tourists of the Colosseum, the thousands of pictures, and then from the metadata of those images, they were able to find the intrinsic parameters of the cameras, and then they matched the features from the images and produced this nice 3D model of the Colosseum. So that's again using the technique known as structure from motion. Now, coming to a piece of glass and trying to reproduce that, which is something that we tried to do when we started working with Nadine, some of the glass shards that we had there were not dissimilar from what you see here. So trying to find features on those, matching those features, and then producing a 3D scan of those features was quite challenging. Doing this using a LiDAR would also be, would have the similar problem, because the light would just traverse the glass itself, and you would have a difficult time doing that. So typically what people do is they dust the parts, or they create some dirt on the dust on the parts, such that they can find features, and those features are matched between the different images, and then accordingly you get a 3D model of those images. Now there are some products on the market now that you can just spray the parts, and then within they're non-destructive. So within 2 or 3 hours, that spray is removed, and that's after you do the task of the 3D reconstruction. So there are various turnkey commercial and non-commercial products for structure from motion. And in the museum, I think Amy tried playing around with one of these and she was successful. So they're pretty easy to work with. The simplest one, if you just want to play around and see how it works, is visual SFM. This is structure from motion again. This, you just add your images, you do some matching, you do your sparse reconstruction. In other words, you find the location of the cameras, the rotation and translation, the location, then you triangulate and it gives you the location of the features. And once you know the location of the cameras, then it's easy to do a dense reconstruction. Another one is OpenSFM, which is a freeware, free source, or open source software that you can do SFM with. And then the commercial ones that are quite expensive, Agisoft, Pix4D, Reality Capture, and there's also probably another dozen softwares that do that. The reason that commercial products are needed, or because they exist and they're making money, is because you can imagine after you implement the vanilla SFM on these products, the results are not fantastic. So they do a lot of these companies then follow up with a lot of regularization, smoothing, and assumptions in terms of surfaces to ameliorate and produce better results for the 3D parts. So what you see here are some of the results that we got from the museum using Agisoft to produce these 3D computer models of various glass parts. And you can see all these glass parts are relatively, well, let's use the word dirty. They have enough texture such that you can use SFM to produce these parts. Now you have the bottom lines that you have here just for the sake of the software itself, and uses these features to align the cameras and produce that sparse mapping before it continues the dense one. So the second component in this proposed idea is to reassemble the shards into a digital twin of the original relic. And these 3 steps are going to be necessary in order to produce that augmented reality application. So reassembling the shards can either be done manually, and that's what we did. Actually, that's what the students did in the first couple of months. They got the shard 3D models, and then they used a software known as Blender. Others include Maya or MeshLab, and that's where you introduce the 3D model that you got through structure from motion, and it's as if you have that physical part with you, and then you move those shards together to finally get a cohesive 3D model as best as your eye can fit. Now this is okay, and it produces good enough results. Another option is to go to automated reassembly, and this is where the science begins. This is where going to a 3D automatic reassembly is really an open field of research right now, and this is what one of my graduate students is getting into. It's nice to really work on research problems of a local relevance. I mean, going way back to when I got my PhD, 2006, till the first 5-6 years, we're just doing research for the sake of research. But then when you find, seriously, then when you find these local problems that are very relevant, and once you start working with them, all of a sudden these very challenging research problems come about that some of the times don't even have a solution to them, but they have this local relevance and everybody's interested in working in them. So this is what we got. This is another part that we reassembled. Again, the parts mapped using structure from motion. And this is, I tried to show in the software how the different components were added. So here you see one part, and then we added a second, and then the third, and then a fourth, and then the final vase here was reconstructed again in software. So this thing, this vase here, I don't suppose was reconstructed yet or brought together. I'm not sure if it has or not. Here's another result way back, again, manually done. So this was rescanned. This was scanned using structure from motion. And then we introduced a wireframe to give it a little bit of structure for people looking at it. Now, the advantages here are beyond just the renovation. In some cases where you cannot renovate or you don't want to renovate, you can show to the user this 3D model, or to the visitor, I should say, the 3D model versus showing a reconstructed object. Here's some other results. This was all manually done. Now, to do this automatically, to create an automated system, you have to, of course, first segment. You want to classify, and then you match. So when I say segment, you get a 3D part like this. When you're trying to find candidate matches to these parts, the first thing you want to do, think about you throwing this 3D model into a computer and not interfering. So the first thing you want the system to do is to segment out, so identify, in other words, the edges or the hypersurfaces that need to be matched to other hypersurfaces from candidate matches. So one way to do that segmentation just says, find the green from the red, from the brown, from the yellow. That's what I mean by segmentation, is look at the surface normals and then try as much as possible, maybe using an algorithm like k-means or a learning algorithm to segment these surfaces or these hypersurfaces into cohesive regions. And then once you have the cohesive regions, one thing you can do is to reduce your search space by identifying if these are actually extremity parts that you don't need to match. In other words, the bottom of the vase, you don't want to match its bottom, and the top of the vase, you also don't want to match the top shape of it. You just want to match the broken parts, which are the bottom, the middle parts of that vase. So this is just one technique to reduce the candidate matches in that library of shards that you have. Okay. Then you can, there are different techniques for matching depending on what you have in front of you and of various difficulties. If the parts are part of a fresco or some kind of stone tablets that is relatively flat, then you can apply 2D matching, two-dimensional matching. And again, the experts here are going to say, yes, from the top, maybe it looks like two-dimensional, but the crack doesn't necessarily have to be a two-dimensional crack. So this is, in theory, this sounds very nice. When we actually implement this to broken parts, I'm sure it's going to have its own family of problems. So this is just like what I'm showing you here is just a literature of people who have worked, excuse me, who have worked in this. Going from 2D to 2.5D to 3D, excuse me. So the way the technique works is they sample the contour of, thank you very much, appreciate it. So think about the top spline here belonging to one part and the bottom spline to another. Problem is when you have a fracture, what I learned this year is that you get the spring effect and the parts or the edges or the splines don't necessarily match anymore. So you have to match across different segments. And the way this does is it allows the matches to work in between points and not just from point to point, allowing for that spring effect to occur. This paper is relatively old, but nevertheless, this is one of the techniques to work in 2D matching. So I won't get into here. These are just the affinity measures for shape and for asymmetry to find the most suitable match in that library of matches. So the query profile to the profiles in the database that you have. You can also go to 2.5D. What I mean by that is that even though it's a 3D match, you have some constraints to it that make it a simpler 3D, which we call 2.5D. In that case, here you can enforce the assumption. So if you know if it's a vase or some shape that has some symmetry to it, you can use that symmetry to make the search space or to confine the search space and make the candidate parts easier to find in your search. That's what I mean by 2.5D. And then, so here the profile of the vase is used to constrain the search space that you have of the candidates. And then finally, if I go to 3D matching, then there are also some affinity measures. Here you have to do a full transformation for the surfaces of the candidate to the query, and then trying to reduce this through optimization of which part matches to the next part. So doesn't always work. And here they're saying through the technique, if it doesn't, then you can you have to or must or try to get some help from the expert. And this brings to mind again human robot or human system interaction. I mean, even though we're talking about automated system, there's no reason why you can't keep a human in the loop and ask the human to assist if if it's not perfect. Why not? We always like to automate. Why not? And here are some of the results of this is actually software that you can download. We've played around with this software. It's okay. It works in some cases. In some other cases, it produces some bizarre results. So I'm showing you on the left a correct result that it worked on its own. Here, it should have given these straight segments. It actually gave a curved segment. So this is some of the mistakes that can happen. Again, this is an open research problem. There's a lot of geometry that can be introduced here, a lot of techniques that can go through with the deep learning community. I'm sure this would be very interesting. Actually, this was published in CVPR, which is the top computer vision conference in the world, and that's where we got. This is not our work. This is somebody else's work, but this is what we're hoping to continue doing. Finally, I just want to get to the punchline and show you what I mean by using augmented reality. So we explained how you can get the database of shard 3D models. We explained how you can produce the digital twin of the relic using that matching of edges and then integrating them together to produce that 3D digital twin. So if you have both of these together, then you can use augmented reality. I'll show a picture next to, first of all, recognize the shard identity, and then indicate to the user the correct placement of each shard on the stand. So examples of augmented reality devices could be phones or tablets, but you can imagine if you're renovating, this is going to be a little bit awkward to hold the phone in your hand and renovate. So a hands-free device might be nicer. Two prominent examples, the Magic Leap and the Microsoft HoloLens. This is a lot more known than the Magic Leap. We have both, and we're experimenting with both. We have some pretty cool results so far. Here, this is one of our students who he has a Magic Leap, and he has the glass piece in his hand. Eventually, how you would want that is to put so you have two locations. You have your PC that has all this information, and on the other hand, you have the stand or the location where you're renovating the actual part, and then the user through augmented reality. Oops, what happened here? I lost that. It's not working. I'm trying to pause it. I'll just let it go. So you see the part here, and so here it tells it piece one, and so when the person grabs piece one, and you can imagine, so think about this as the part that's being fit. So when I look at it, the system tells me this is piece one. I grab it in my hand and I'm moving it along. The place where the part is being renovated is in front of you. And then when I look at it in AR, this digital twin is mapped on top of the actual physical object. And in red here, it tells me where this piece has to fit. So then it gives me a tool to be able to place that object at the correct location. So I believe this can has the potential of being a great tool. It's up to you to tell me if this is indeed a good idea or a terrible idea. So things to still to do. We have a lot of issues with the scanning, issue of transparency, getting that spray and seeing if it has a good effect in producing these 3D models. The automated 3D puzzle problem. This is a research problem. Very excited to be working on that. I have a graduate student who's Very happy. She just started, 4 or 5 months ago, and she's happily working on this problem. Recognizing the identity, this is relatively simple when you see it. There's lots of object recognition or piece, they call this piece recognition, if you like, using computer vision. Determining the priority of placement. This is something I didn't talk about earlier. Yes, it'll tell you where it is, it'll tell you, but what's more difficult is which piece should fit first, right? Because let's say I have a bottom here and I take a top piece, obviously it's not going to fit anywhere. Another thing is it might be advantageous having this computer model, having it suggest the order of placement such that it's easier to glue part A versus part B or vice versa. So since you already have that information in digitally. Finalize the AR prototype application, working hard on that. We're trying to to produce a prototype that we can show to the museum and then start iterating on that. I'm sure they're eager to use something like this, and we're eager to finish the work that we have. Okay, thank you. That's it for me.
Thank you very much, Daniel. That's really very impressive and very instructive to see the potential here, but also to see some of the challenges that the methods still are facing with the real case situations. And also thank you for putting us spot on with the end of this session here, timing. I'm very impressed with all participants actually to stick to the program so nicely.
Thank you.
If you could stop screen sharing, please.
Yes, of course.
Because now, rather than having an individual question and answer session for this particular talk, I think we have now a closing session which should give opportunity for everybody to chip in, to contribute, to comment, to ask questions, to make suggestions. We have a panel here of 3 people sharing this closing session, Jihad, Nadine, and myself. And the proposal would be that we all make the 3 of us make some initial short statements looking back what we have seen, but then opening the floor really for everybody to contribute and to see where we go with this. So stay with us, please. The lunch break will be after the closing session, and feel free and encouraged to contribute.
Okay. So I would like to first ask Nadine to tell us what she had in mind with this closing session. And then I'll be happy to add my comments, my perspective as a total outsider, but very much seriously implicated in the discussion that has taken place in the last 2 days.
Great, thank you. First of all, thank you very much, Jihad, for joining in at this point. And before we start the closing session, I'd like to ask a question about the previous 2 panels, at least. So I have a question for Malek and Mohamad, if I may. So in an elemental analysis using a handheld XRF could actually potentially identify a fragment in a pool of shards. Like we were looking at the shards yesterday. We looked at the table where Stephen told us that we have about 5,000 shards, more or less. So potentially using that unit, we could identify a missing shard from a partially restored vessel. Is that correct?
So doing the analysis using this handheld XRF, you can assemble or reassemble the objects that have similar compositions together. So supposedly to be belonging to the same object, let's say.
Yes, I think that's the part of the strength here. If we have lots of body shards, which are not diagnostic necessarily, we should be able, with the handheld XRF, to characterize it and compare it to those major pieces of fragments where we have 2 or 3 alternatives where that body shard could go, and see, okay, it's chemically much closer to this one than to that, and therefore help sorting the puzzle into these different boxes of individual objects. That should be one of the strengths.
So here comes my question to you, Thilo, specifically. So how different or how similar or unsimilar are these glass vessels in terms of composition? I mean, do they have like broad similarities, or can we be very specific when we use such equipment, very precise equipment?
Now that's the real challenge now, beyond the theory. If we look at the time frame of the collection spans maybe roughly 1 millennium. The first millennium CE, in that period, we would have, say, roughly 10 different major chemical compositions that one should be able to differentiate. But if you have a particular period heavily represented, then you may have a dozen or 2 objects from that same type of composition, Levantine 1, Levantine 2. The Egypt glass should stand out and be easily recognized because it should be rare anyway here. The later, the HIMT glasses, they should be easily characterized, but others may may heavily overlap. And then it depends, for instance, whether that particular object from that major glass composition had been made from recycled glass, picking up certain contamination in the process, while the other object may have been made from fresh raw glass and therefore be cleaner on the trace element level. So it all depends really at the end of the day on the actual circumstances. There may be easily assignable pieces, and there may be others where we say, look, they come from the same pot of glass making. They have been blown within a day or 2. They managed to come to the collection as real twins, and then we cannot tell them apart. But it's one of the interesting challenges, actually, for us here, where we know we have a finite number of objects, and we can visually assign lots of shards to the same object, to analyze all of those shards and to see what that instrument gives us in terms of closeness of analysis, closeness of result. If we have 10 fragments from one object, and we analyze those 10, we see how closely they should cluster as a cloud, a data cloud, a tight cloud, hopefully. And then an unknown object can fall into that cloud or not. And that should help us in archaeological contexts where we don't have this pre-existing knowledge that we know how many objects are there, how much percentage of each object exists. So this as a test case will inform much wider application for more difficult cases, such as a cargo of a shipwreck, a merchant's bag of crushed glass. Is that coming from one source, or is it coming from collection all over the city? So that sort of research can be informed by what we will discover here.
Great. Do we have any comments or questions from the audience, the wider audience? Yes, Stephen.
Well, you mentioned the number 5,000. So trying to do XRF on 5,000 fragments, the amount of time is just not real. It's impossible. And I agree with Thilo. I think you'll get clusters. You may get you may get areas, but I don't know that you'll ever be able to precisely identify a fragment to another piece, to an individual piece.
And Stephen, most of the things you will see visually with your experience much faster than the XRF. So we are not having 5,000, I hope, unidentified objects, fragments.
No, actually, when we looked at the samples yesterday, we saw that they were already divided in different bags. So they were already assembled according to more or less color, thickness. Claire, please correct me if I'm wrong. So that's why, of course, we were not thinking of running an elemental analysis on all 5,000 samples, but maybe select a few.
A few dozen, a few hundred.
Unfortunately, the groups of fragments we're talking about, they're just actually they just translate into like wider trays that they're just grouped together now for midterm storage, but they would need to be spread again. They're grouped by their location on the gallery floor, and they're by no means a homogeneous group. So there's no guarantee that they belong together, actually. They were just found together on the floor.
Okay. Thilo, would you like to take the lead on this, on the next, maybe what are, well, the prospects, future prospects from this type of project and collaboration? Yes, Bettina, yes, there is a question. Bettina, please go ahead.
I have no question, but I have information for Daniel Asmar. There is a similar project from the Fraunhofer Institute in Berlin. They are trying to reconstruct Roman wall painting by scanning them and put them together with the digital programs. And the new thing is that they're trying to scan both sides at the same time. And they have invented a new scanner. And maybe this is a good, or this might be an information to get in cooperation, because I think the project from Daniel is very similar to that project.
Thank you very much for the suggestion. Do you know do you remember the name of the PI there, or one of the people?
Yes, it's Dr. Nikolai, and I can send you a contact. I have a contact, and I can send it to you. No problem.
Thank you very much.
While we are with questions about the previous talks, I'll ask a question to Daniel. First, I was very excited to see the progress that is being made. This is all very encouraging, difficult and important problems, as you say. So in the reconstruction that you described, in which the 3D mapping of objects was used to aid a human into finding the spot for the pieces, how important was it for you to have a picture of the original object?
It was actually very, very important. I mean, the students, I don't think they could have trialed and erred. But again, since the parts are so fragile, I don't think the museum would have let us play around too much with the parts. Actually, we were doing it in software, but yet having the original picture there helps you a lot place the pieces at the right place. So that's a very good question, because it did help a lot.
And you mentioned that things don't always work. What can we learn from the cases in which things don't work?
Well, from my readings, again, I'm not an expert in this, and I know I'm fine from the computer vision background, but coming to match these parts, you would think that the shapes and the edges and the profiles match perfectly, and they don't. What I've learned is when the glass breaks, the actual splines and the profiles that you get distort. I think Nadine called it in one of the articles springing. It works like a spring. And so you have to allow a lot of forgiveness in the computer vision program when you're matching the splines together, in order not to miss any match. You know, if the thresholds are very low in the matching, you're going to miss these matches because in effect, after the break happened, they look differently.
But I'd like to ask you, Daniel, so obviously from a curator's point of view, having digitizing your collection is, I think, is an essential step before any trial or any reconstruction. Of course, I'm sure it would help much more.
Yeah, digitizing it would be very important, but again, we're limited to how much you would, I mean, it's a comment, right? You're asking me if it's a good idea to digitize them all. Definitely, if we have the ability to digitize them, we're trying to create an automated or a much simpler process for the digitization where we can put the pieces without avoiding any damage to them anymore, such that you get a scan from both sides. But I forget who suggested a little bit earlier, she suggested that the scan is happening on both sides. I'm wondering how the placement of the shards is in whatever device is being used to scan them, such that you can get a picture from both sides. So I'm eager to see the research of that group in Germany to maybe reproduce that here.
I meant prior, before breaking a piece or before a piece gets broken. If you digitize your entire collection, this will definitely help a restorer, and whether it's a 3D restoration or a 3D print, eventually a copy of the original object, or actually it might help in the restoration process. I mean, physical restoration.
Yeah, I mean, it's not me saying it. Most of the work in 3D, I mean, you go to the Europeana project that they have, thousands and thousands of parts have been recreated in 3D. It's an argument that's been settled a long time ago. There's a lot of benefit in having these digital twins for much larger objects too, areas, you know. I mean, you think of, you know, the areas that in Syria that was demolished. If we had those digital twins before that happened, everybody is crying for all those areas. That would have been marvelous. Some areas do exist and others don't. But being able to do that at the museum, going back to the little scale, being able to do that in the museum for all the parts, I think would be very beneficial.
So this brings us to the crucial question. Would we be able, if we combine traditional typology of glass with a new, analysis, elemental analysis, and physical and chemical analysis of the fragments or the glass itself, whether it's broken or not, can we eventually contribute to our knowledge as archaeologists, as field archaeologists? Can this help us identify and date and classify whatever our new finds on our archaeological field or not? I mean, can this experiential project help us in the classification, typology, analysis, and more importantly, dating of new elements or new findings? And this is a question to all of us. I mean, this is open. I open the floor to all interventions.
Hi. A small point related to the previous discussion, perhaps before we launch. And one of those is, I put the link in the chat already, which is about another project that may have parallels with digital reconstruction, which is a project called Gravitate, which I think finished in 2018, but it's well published. So, I mean, you probably already know about it, but if you don't, it's worth looking at it. It similarly looked at reassembling lots of fragments of ancient statuary, but also pots and other cultural heritage items. And my second point related to the conversation about previously having digitally scanned everything, which is the ideal, but of course, you know, we live in the real world and time and resources are limited. But there have been very interesting methods developed from existing images. So, for example, in cases where there are archival images, perhaps several elevations of an object that can be put together into a 3D model, and Thomas Flynn, who works for Sketchfab, did some very interesting work on some archival images from the Metropolitan. It's a ceramic plate from the Metropolitan Museum, and created a 3D model for that. And I wonder if that's an interesting, you know, if such archival material exists, would that be a good starting point for you to reconstruct your fragments too?
Thank you, Joanne. Anyone else has a comment or a?
I'd just like to comment on the
Yes.
archival images she was mentioning. It's a much more difficult problem to produce digital twins from archival images because you don't have the viewpoints that you need to, if you're using photogrammetry. You just have images, you don't have the 3D part in front of you. It's much more difficult. I just wanted to say that.
I'll just put the link in the chat in case you're interested.
So it's been a lot of fun for me, particularly joining this discussion. As an outsider, I'd say to take some things far more seriously maybe than the actual participants, for whom some of these things may be absolutely natural. I come to this subject both as a chair of the Department of Physics and somebody who's been helping with the graduate program in computational sciences in the Faculty of Arts and Sciences, and a director for the Center for Advanced Mathematical Sciences at the AUB. So my concerns within that field are multifaceted, but they're all actually deeply motivated by the problem at hand. I learned first about the complexities associated with glass from an archaeological point of view by listening to a beautiful presentation by Thilo last year in the context of a series that we put together on broken glass. And that series in many ways actually mapped out the various ways in which glass enters our lives, sometimes tragically. And in mapping it, we in some sense began identifying interesting problems that could be of interest for the communities that I try to serve from my various positions. So primary among those, and we're currently in the midst of it, but we can see more reflections on glass taking place in 2022, the year of glass. Primary of those are the issues raised by the archaeological dimension of glass. Its making, its history, the various techniques that were brought into it, technological developments, networks of trade and distribution of glass, material science and its contribution to it. And then more recently, a discussion associated with the reconstruction of glass that we are working through here at AUB, our museum. Generally, the whole questions raised by the tragic events that we went through, which I believe are of fundamental significance to the field. And this is precisely the point of view we want to bring to the discussion. There is, of course, that side which is aiding what's happening in the museum. On the other, and I see my colleagues in physics and Daniel from an engineering point of view, raising fundamental questions, fundamental research questions that can actually advance the field and benefit as well as aid the experts that we have here in the field. So if I were to summarize what I've learned in all of these discussions, it's clear that the word has to, a title for that has to be puzzles, puzzles, puzzles. It's all about puzzles. It's all what archaeologists are doing apparently, whether from the sites themselves, trying to work through the sites from pieces and fragments, reconstructing, or actually the kind of puzzles that Thilo likes to deal with. And from my perspective, they are spatio-temporal puzzles, Thilo, if I may, in the sense that with material science, one can begin establishing spatial correlations. And these spatial correlations can also, with the help of history and a sense of economics, trade, social indicators, allow us to establish a chronological telling of how, when, where things were made and how they spread. I can't help but think that the data analytic techniques that have been brought to bear on many other fields in which data of a spatial and temporal nature is gathered can have a significant impact on the discussion. Again, it's pushing against experts who have basically painstakingly developed cherished techniques. But I would like to hear what our colleagues in archaeology have to say about the use of data analytic techniques to help address or clarify some of the patterns that are hidden in the data that people of the expertise of Thilo may have identified over time. That's on one aspect of the puzzle, i.e. collecting charts, making material science type characterizations, and then trying to put together a story, okay? To me, that's a very beautiful subject, and it would be great to have a sense of all the data that is available and bring expertise to bear on it that is perhaps very far removed from the field that you all are directly implicated in. There is the other side, of course, which is the puzzles associated with the reconstruction of shards. And here, the word puzzle is very natural to many communities. People coming from computer science, computer geometry, computer vision, people coming to it from the point of view of artificial intelligence, deep learning. Various communities are deeply interested in puzzle solving, primarily as a human activity with a lot of fun, play, and expertise behind it. And we have here two experts who I would love to hear their feedback on the role of machines in perhaps aiding and eventually contributing significantly to the work that they do. What is their sense of the promise of machines? From my point of view, at the Center for Advanced Mathematical Sciences, I personally see myself with colleagues, whether in computer science or engineering, committing all the resources at our disposals to drive a problem solving in these directions. For one, in the center, we like to celebrate play. Okay, so mathematics as an invitation to play. And this is certainly a perfect context in which to do that, irrespective of the tragic conditions that brought it about. Always. We have to put a parenthesis around what we all went through. So there is that aspect. And then we would like to ask our colleagues here, what is the most productive way in which we can collaborate and proceed? I can see us inviting specialized experts to help inform the conversation on the role of artificial intelligence in this game. I can see us coupling experts who are in the field together with these experts, again, here at AUB, because they're naturally here with us at AUB, to inform and constrain the work of people coming from the deep learning perspective on the problem. I can see us raising the questions from a fundamental point of view, working with computer scientists who like to think of puzzles as aid to solve fundamental problems in their fields, at the same time helping with the computer science insights in the solution of some of the puzzles that are raised here. So I can see many directions in which we can go, and I'm certainly committed to supporting these directions. Part of the vision of the center, which I'm currently directing, but in particular in this 2022, the year of glass, this is a very important occasion for us to capitalize on. And we have a lot to learn from all those who are present here. I'm very much inspired by the experiment of Daniel and his team. I think there is a lot to build on, a lot to put to use. That's pretty much the summary from my perspectives. Puzzles coming from the field, puzzles associated with actual fragments, and then questions I can raise to folks I heard on the first day. I saw them all trying to solve inverse problems, as I described to Nadine. They're always trying to get a sense of the technology or the techniques that might have been brought to bear on the making of something. But I had a lot of questions for them. How unique are their solutions? and the solutions they come up with, how do they decide that it's actually very close to what the original? Is it a matter of visual matching, or is there more analysis that is involved into the matching of the technique that they used and the outcome that they ended up with? So I had a lot of questions on this end, but I can now either allow further comments from the audience or maybe allow Thilo to have his perspective on the last 2 days. Thank you, Nadine. Thank you for inviting me for this critical moment. It started with physics from the British Museum. Then it started with geophysics, with Thilo giving a perspective on the coming together of glass. Then we had you at the beginning talking about order out of chaos. I guess the natural thing would have been for me to tell you about the nucleosynthesis of silicon. Thank you.
Yeah, if I may pick up on a few things that you brought up. Now, one observation that is very clear and came out here is, whatever we do, it is a two-way street. It's not that poor archaeologists or pure museum people are asking for the scientists to come to the rescue or the engineers. It's quite, not to the contrary, but it's much more complex. And even if you look back into the history of sciences, there's always been the challenges posed by the humanities, the challenges posed by archaeology, the development of chemical analysis, quantitative analysis has been done on ancient coins, Roman coins, because that in the 18th, 19th century, that was an interesting topic. So providing an interesting question and challenge to the sciences, to the engineering people, is in itself a service, but also providing case studies on which these new advances can be tested. Now, if in return the archaeologists, the museum people learn from it, even better. But I think it's much more, and that became clear here, a cooperation and a mutual benefit from all of this. But not more importantly, as important is what you mentioned at the end, the input from the fingertips, from the experience, from the practical skills and craft. And through experience, through reconstructing, redoing it, contributing to our understanding of the practices of the past. And the key person, the key profession linking all of that, the archaeological study, the typological study, the reconstruction, the scientific analysis, the method development, the key person, the key people are the conservators who deal with the object, as we have heard, sometimes for weeks with a single object, really intimately, getting to know that object, but also having the open mind to look out and ask questions right and left and bring in all the experts to work together. Now here we are in an absolutely privileged situation that we have the best experts from the world working on this, from the British Museum, from the Institut National du Patrimoine, sorry, I forgot their exact title, from the French colleagues, volunteering their expertise from the Corning Museum of Glass, even if in an emeritus capacity. It's really amazing to see this, and that gives an opportunity for the AUB Archeological Museum collection to be put firmly on the map of archaeological, of typological glass research, of method development. So I think we have work to do for the next 10 years, even long after the last object has been fully restored, and make a fantastic knowledge creation machine out of this disaster. But it's essential that everybody contributes. All the practical people, all the conservators, all the archaeologists, all the typology people, and there Marianne brought up the big problem: who can actually develop a typology for a whole region covering half a millennium at least? So that we cannot do with this one small case study, but we can help laying the foundation for that or giving a stimulus for that. So we have had this inflection point a year and a half ago, which looked like and is a disaster, unmitigated disaster, but let's make the best of it so that it will be recognized as something constructive.
So do we have any more comments or questions from the wider audience? If we don't,
Actually,
yeah.
can I
Yes,
just
Stephen
ask
and Claire, go ahead.
a question? It's kind of going back to what we were saying earlier about learning more about provenance and composition of the vessels. And I was wondering if how the finds that will be done at the British Museum can be reproduced here at the AUB with similar techniques or exact same techniques, exact same analysis. What is the sort of the error margin between like just two different machines? Can we relate those very closely? Maybe that's a question for Malek or maybe someone at the British Museum.
Malek, would you like to address that? Thank you.
I think it's very simple. We have to try it. There is a lot of expertise regarding analyzing and interpreting data that we need to do here at AUB, because unfortunately we don't have this long history of dealing with such samples. The folks from the CNRS do have more experience, but the nuclear techniques, I guess, are seen as complementary to the more conventional techniques such as SEM. So I think that is actually, in addition to the XRF work that has been initiated, maybe the next step would be is to compare some of the results that we can obtain here at AUB and those that are obtained in the British Museum. As I said, it is very encouraging for me to have that to know that you have counterpart in Cyprus and at the British Museum who can do studies that are similar to ours. And this will certainly strengthen our the expertise that we want to develop here in Lebanon.
Nadine, do you mind if I jump in here?
Please do.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, Malek. I think one of the big things that has come out from our perspective is that we really, of course, should take this as just the very beginning of this sort of collaboration. So I think once we've got some work under our belt and actually have some results and some data to process, I'll be in touch and let's organize a much smaller sort of discussion between you guys and the scientists, the British Museum, the conservators, and use that as a sort of an ongoing point of collaboration and feedback. So we're not working in isolation, but can continue to talk.
Great. Thank you very much, James. Looking forward to that. And actually, if I can summarize, well, I can say that this has been an eye-opener, this entire workshop. I'm very grateful to everybody who has participated. If I can summarize it in one word, that actually, and repeat Thilo's reflection, knowledge creation machine. If we can get to that, if we can turn this disaster into a knowledge creation machine, then I think this workshop has served its purpose. So thank you very much, all of you, for participating, for being here, for registering, for sustaining 2 days of lectures and conferences. But I think this has been very enriching to all of us. Thank you very much. And I hope I know we will stay in touch, and hopefully we can probably publish these tentative research questions and maybe get to the bottom of it, if not in the very near future, maybe in 10 years, as Thilo as well pointed out. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nadine.
Okay, thank you. Thanks,
Thanks,
Nadine.
everyone.
Thanks, Ziad. Bye.